point. I haven't seen any like official Secret Service like statement or anything like that. So besides what those journalists are being told,
Hmm.
and I don't know. I feel like
So,
CNN probably wouldn't be lying about that, about something like this at least.
Aircraft Sparky says he's probably a DGG member. Probably not. He was outside, so that really kind of takes care of most of the internet personalities, right? Audiences. They were
True.
outside, touching grass. Probably wasn't any of them. It's one of those things where it also kind of means that we do need to take JD Vance more seriously as a candidate, right? And what I mean by that is, especially with Trump's age, the fact that JD Vance very well might be called to serve up and become the president if Trump is elected. So that's definitely a concern. Did you see the Libertarian Party's tweet that they made on Twitter?
I didn't.
I show you that.
No. What was that? What was
They
the tweet?
took a so I'll just read it to you here real quick. I'll pull a Boy on for this too. Hold on. Boy, how are you doing?
What is up, Wick and
Yeah,
Lacto?
we're just convincing a little beforehand. We're talking about the second Trump assassination attempt. Have you heard about this?
I've heard shots were fired some distance away from Trump, so I guess I'm not sure how serious it was, but I haven't looked into it.
Well, apparently there's uh, it was confirmed to be an assassination attempt. The Secret Service pursued him. Apparently he was apprehended. He got in his truck or whatever and ran away. They apprehended him sometime later. No one was hurt, so that's good. But I am concerned that this continues to happen. That is a problem. I was telling uh, our boy Lactoid also about a tweet I saw earlier from the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, I believe.
Oh boy. Well, hold on. Just to be clear, there is a distinct difference between the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire is by far the most unhinged section of
Yeah,
libertarianism that
they
exists on
they
Twitter.
tweeted this. They tweeted this. Anyone who murders Kamala Harris would be an American hero.
Just to be clear, that account has also tweeted like pretty expressively like pro-Nazi things in the past too. Like it's not, they are not affiliated with like the actual LP National. Just to be like they're wackos. Just to be clear, right? They are crazy.
Yeah.
I disavow. I disavow.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Okay, well, yeah, it seems like we are living in a time where uh, violence and threats of violence are becoming more and more normalized. But that's not the topic, at least not strictly tonight. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be discussing threats to democracy. Which is a bigger threat to democracy? The Republican Party and Trump or the Democrats and Kamala Harris? Uh, Econoboy was kind enough to replace our original guest on this. We had Hutch lined up, but he was feeling sick. Couldn't make it today.
He was
And
feeling like running away, Wick. That's what he was feeling like. Okay.
Lactoid's pretty scary. Lactoid's pretty scary. He was
Yeah.
I don't know if you watched him on Cupid last night, but he was tearing it up. He was slaying people left and right. After I beat him initially, but it was late, so I had to go.
I think I wasn't I the one that was initially selected, and then she said, "Oh, I'm going to edge it to me." I think
She
that's what it
said
was
that
said.
she was leaning towards you because you were new.
Well,
But then the
she said we were
other
tied. She said we were tied,
yeah.
but then she was leaning towards me on top of that because I was new. So I don't know if you were undefeated. It's kind of a
I remain undefeated, is what I'm saying, after I destroyed all the MAGA people.
Wick
But
is questioning the final results, it sounds like.
yes,
rigged.
regardless, tonight we're going to have a discussion about this topic. I think it's an interesting thing because there are threats to democracy, in my opinion, from both sides. So you just have to weigh and measure which is the bigger threat, and we've got these great gentlemen here to discuss that with us. Lactoid, I'm going to pass the ball first to you. Give your opening statement, and then we'll pass it to Econoboy. Go ahead, Lactoid. Start us
Yeah.
off.
So just there's a couple things that need explanation here, and Econoboy, obviously, you can't hold this against Econoboy because He was gracious enough to jump in last minute, and he actually wasn't part of the initial discussion. So this is unfortunately not this is not directed at him whatsoever. But the original, the thing that led to this conversation was that I made a Twitter post, this was back in August, calling the Democrats a threat to democracy. Just to be clear, this was paired with criticisms of the Democrats saying, hey, every single time I bring an allegation towards you guys of something bad that you do, it seems that you always whataboutism to whatever Trump did, right? You always say, well, Trump's bad, well, Trump's bad, well, Trump's bad. And it's a little bit ironic, I think, that not only in the last debate, but also this one, with the topic being what it is, that we're seeing that sort of implicitly happen again, which is that, my criticism is that the Democrats are a threat to democracy. It's, I do think that they are more of a threat than Trump is, but that is a different claim than I initially made. The main claim that I'm trying to push here is that Democrats are a threat to democracy based on a wide variety of metrics. And so I'm going to get into them a little bit right now. So when we're talking about threat to democracy, I think it's important to define what this means here. The reason I made that post was because on the Hippy Dippy a while ago, there were some people who argued about what a threat to democracy meant for apparently 4 hours or 3 hours or something along those lines, and they made no headway. There was a dispute as to whether or not threat to democracy means, for sure, destruction of the republic. I don't accept that, right? I think it's obviously there can be a threat that isn't a guarantee. You can have somebody be a threat to the country, be a threat to the Constitution, be a threat to democracy, but it's not guaranteed that they're actually going to destroy the country. I don't disagree under this metric that Trump is some threat to democracy. Of course he is. I'm not going to deny this. The question is not whether or not somebody is a threat to democracy. The question is, how much of a threat are they? And I'm going to posit that the Democrats are a significant threat to democracy. We have numerous examples here. The first thing I want to point out is that the Democrats use the superdelegate system, which has a history here of undermining the popular will of the Democratic Party. In 2016, Bernie Sanders had the primary rigged against him, and we had examples, like, for example, Tammy Baldwin, of superdelegates voting against their constituents for Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that the people voted for Bernie Sanders. This is an undemocratic measure. We have the Dems forcing RFK to stay on the ballot, fighting to get him off the ballot in places that they want him off the ballot. They're fighting to remove Cornel off the ballot, Cornel West, and there's multiple attempts, some successful, to remove Jill Stein off the ballot. This is combined with their removal of Trump from the Colorado ballot, the attempt to remove Trump from the Colorado ballot, and also the lawfare, the appointment of non-originalist justices, and of course, the threats of court packing. All of these fit into threat to democracy because, in my view, threat to democracy can mean one or both of the following. One, organizing or using a system to limit actual voter options and establish legal but oligopolic control. And two, using arguably legal mechanisms to undermine critical elements of functionality of the U.S. government or its constitution. I think based on the things I've said thus far, the Democratic Party obviously meets this threshold to be a threat to democracy. I will take the additional stance here that they are a greater threat to democracy than Trump, but just to be crystal clear, my initial position here is that the Democrats are a threat to democracy under this standard.
Sure. Thanks for being here. We'll get into it as we go. Econoboy, what say ye?
Yeah, sure. So I guess to take a step back, democracy, I guess, is most simply said, is just a framework for decision making, right? So it involves either direct or representative decision making based on voter preference, and that preference is made known typically through, you would say, voting for said policies directly in the case of like a referenda or an initiative or something like that, or obviously representatives who might, represent some shared ideological interest, right? So I vote for like a Democratic representative because I feel like Democrats are, let's just say, like more representative of what my preferences are than a Republican, right? And so said policies or representatives are then enacted or elected depending on, of course, the exact rules of the voting system. And that's like a basic sort of framework for democracy. And so if we spill that into the exact nature of this discussion, American democracy, so states send electoral college votes to Congress based on state level voter preference. Of course, we can get into some nuance here, faithless electors and things like this or whatever. But that's, generally speaking, that's the case. And Congress counts these electoral votes in sort of a, formalized process, but, it's essentially just whatever the voters choose on a state level basis. And then the individual with at least 270 of these votes is chosen as the winner, right? And so that's sort of American democracy. And so when I try to determine, well, who's the greater threat to American democracy, well, it's probably not the Democrats, right? It's probably the Republicans. And the reason I say that is because we can look at Donald Trump's actions when he lost an election. It was basically to do like literally everything he could conceivably do to try and get the voter preference of states that voted against him thrown out. That is, of course, a deeply anti-democratic thing to do. Of course, if he had succeeded in that regard, he would have stolen the election, and he would have subverted the will of the people in the states who decided they would rather have Joe Biden be president than Donald Trump, even under the rules of the American election system, which certainly isn't the most purely democratic system. But even under those rules and that democratic framework, of course, that would be deeply anti-democratic. What is scarier when we're comparing Donald Trump to Kamala Harris in this election, 2024, is that Trump at least, has seemed to surround himself by even more sycophants, right? Look at J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance has explicitly said he would actually go along with the plot to overthrow the election in the ninth hour. This would have involved J.D. Vance basically saying, hey, these fake states of electors, well, you're either going to count them or, oh no, there's just no way we can tell. We've got the fake set of electors and then the real set. What am I supposed to do? I can't really determine what it is. And so the House is going to elect the president because we can't determine who actually got the 270 vote threshold, which of course is just another way to subvert the will of the people in those states. And so because of that, and because of Trump's, very clear willingness to take advantage of his cult of personality to engender a very deep skepticism of the democratic legitimacy of the opposition, this is how democracies die, right? Is the feeling that when our opposition gets elected, they're not democratically legitimate. We've never had quite so much of that in this country ever since Donald Trump got elected. 3/4 of Republicans think that Biden wasn't legitimately elected. That's a type of skepticism that's quite a dangerous threat to democracy. And of course, it comes directly from Donald Trump parroting these election lies. And so that's why I would say overall, Donald Trump is certainly the bigger threat to democracy and the bigger threat to faith in our democratic institutions. And that is a very key thing. Democracy requires faith in democracy, right? It's sort of like a fiat currency, right? You have to have faith that democracy actually works, or it's not going to work. When you've got 30% of the country that just doesn't believe that democracy is working as it's supposed to because they think that their votes don't count, that's a real problem. And if that number increases to 40, 50% of the country, you might have serious problems with election violence that you guys were referencing earlier as well. So obviously that's a really big problem. And so that's why I think Republicans are worse than Democrats on this issue.
Well, with that, the floor is open. Let's get to it. Go ahead, gang. I'll interrupt if I'm confused. So
Can I just to start? And again, I totally fully acknowledge why your intro was the way it is, and we can even discuss. We can even spend the whole time discussing that particular question about who is more of a threat to democracy, because that was the topic that you were given. But do you agree with me that at the very least, based on some of the things that I brought up, that the Democrats do pose some threat to democracy?
I mean, if I understand the four things that you brought up, so Democrats use superdelegates, they try to remove third-party candidates from the ballot, they use lawfare, and that they threaten court packing. I would say that your
the primary stuff with in 2016 and 2024.
Yeah. The only issue that I could agree with on a marginal case would be removing the third-party candidates from the ballot. But I guess I wouldn't consider that a very significant threat to democracy, not American democracy specifically, let's say. The other three things I don't really consider very legitimate criticisms.
Okay, well, let's start then with removing Joe Biden off of the ticket, essentially, and giving the ticket to Kamala Harris. So but
that's not. Are we talking about? Because that's not the superdelegates thing. That's separate. So is this a new thing that you want to talk about? The
right. So
Joe Biden switch up?
Yeah, I agree with you that this is different than the superdelegate system in that it's two different periods of time and it's two different mechanisms of operation. But I think that they both are under the same umbrella of the DNC being incredibly elitist as to how it runs the party. Right. The RNC didn't like Trump, and they probably don't like him now. The elites within the party. But just due to raw popularity, they have to accept him because the RNC doesn't have superdelegates. They didn't have superdelegates in 2016. They didn't have superdelegates in 2020, and they don't have it now, right? And so in 2000, we can start with the superdelegate system. In 2016, Despite Bernie Sanders winning the popular vote in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, who was a superdelegate, voted for Hillary and Clinton anyway. This is not a system that exists within the RNC. That's, I think, evidence of the party trying to control the candidate as opposed to the voters trying to control the candidate. And we're seeing the exact same thing right now where we have Biden, who won a lot of primary votes, right? He was absolutely won the primary. He was the candidate. And due to pressure from top Democrat leaders, he stepped down, right? I think it's fair to say that he was pressured out. And Kamala Harris, despite not winning any of a primary among the actual voters, is now the candidate. Do you think Kamala Harris would have won a primary against Bernie Sanders? I don't think that's guaranteed, right? She got creamed last time. I don't think it's guaranteed that she would have won a primary. So, I mean, isn't the party controlling the candidate as opposed to the voters controlling the candidate? I mean, that would seem to be anti-democratic almost by definition.
Well, I mean, it kind of depends on the realm in which we're talking about here, right? So, American democracy is kind of party neutral. So, the constitutional way that our democracy is set up doesn't really include sort of clear rules for how parties can organize themselves. It's why people will make the argument that, well, parties are technically like private organizations, right? You know, they're sort of like a free association organizations that people, you know, develop frameworks in a decentralized fashion. And that's why one of the criticisms of the Republican primary in 2016, I believe, was that some, states had different rules for how delegates were actually distributed, whereas some states, you could win, especially in such a crowded primary, you could win 40% of the vote, but get 55, 60% all the delegates from that state. That's not necessarily the most democratic system. Whereas the primary system in 2016 for the Democrats had proportional delegate distribution, right? So you had super delegates, but you also had proportional delegate distribution. So there's kind of a give and take in terms of the exacting nature of how democratic the primary process is. But that's not really at issue in this discussion. We're talking about the American democratic experiment, right? Which is not really concerned with how individual parties are set up. It's one of the reasons why these processes have changed so significantly over time between, a few people in a smoky room, you could say, just like picking the candidate without any campaigning at all, versus something like a primary sort of democratic system, versus, something like the Kamala situation where they had to swap out a candidate because one steps down. We could say it's anti-democratic, sure, but it's not a threat to American democracy for a party to decide that, one candidate's not good, we're going to switch him out with another one, especially when that candidate that got switched in, Kamala Harris, she actually did win, the delegate vote. Like, the delegates chose Kamala Harris to be the candidate. So Democrats don't have a problem with it, so I don't feel like we should either. Anyway, so that's my thought.
Going back to when people in smoky rooms pick the candidate, I would consider this to be less democratic, and people who advocate or push for or participate in a system that's closer to that, I think is more of a threat to democracy than not. And the reason I'm asserting this is political parties, whether we'd like to admit it or not, are not just private organizations, right? They're these pseudo-private organizations where, yes, they are, on face value, it's just a bunch of people who have this, similar political views getting together. But they also have privileges among the state level, right? I mean, the state runs primary elections using state resources, and you can go and vote in the primary elections. And those primaries in 2016 were unfairly rigged against Bernie Sanders, right? WikiLeaks came out with information demonstrating that top party officials were conspiring against Bernie Sanders. He wouldn't have won either way. I don't disagree with that.
That doesn't mean it's rigged. That doesn't mean it's rigged.
If you have top officials and Donna Brazile giving questions ahead of time to Hillary Clinton, you don't think that's rigging the whole primary system against Bernie?
I think she gave questions to Hillary in the general election, number one. Number two, party leaders expressing a preference or, trying to work to enact their preferences is not necessarily anti-democratic. Number two. Number three, Trump had every party elite seemingly in the whole entire country against him. He was still able to win because he just got the votes. Bernie couldn't get the votes. Look, I voted for Bernie in the primary both times. I wasn't exactly happy that Bernie lost, right? I'm still a Bernie crap myself, but he did lose, right? And so, nonetheless, though, look at what happened, right? Hillary, the terribly undemocratically elected candidate, she ends up losing the general election, conceding the next day, right? Whereas Trump, he ends up winning the primary in 2020. He loses that election. He tries to engage in conspiracy to overthrow American democracy as we know it. American democracy as we know it is kind of like party organization neutral. There's nothing in the Constitution about how parties are organized, how they should be organized. That's up to the individual
But there's
party.
state laws.
But American democracy as we know it does include the electoral vote counting. It does include state level preference of voting. That is how we determine the winner of our elections. Ultimately, that is the process that Trump tried to subvert. That's why Trump is a bigger threat to American democracy than any Democrat.
The
Question for
electoral
each of you after you respond.
Yeah.
You can respond, but then I have a question for each of you. Go ahead.
the electoral process in this country right now, as we know it, goes beyond just the Constitution here. There's state statutes that are controlling here, and there are state statutes that dictate how primaries can operate in certain circumstances. This is not just a private affair, right? Primaries are a pseudo-private, pseudo-public affair. And again, even if technically what they did was legal, which I think it probably was, which is why my definition says that it can be legal but can still be a threat to democracy. Arguably, even if what Eastman proposed was legal, I would agree that it'd be a threat to democracy, even if what Eastman proposed is legal, just to be clear. That doesn't change the fact that when you have a Democratic Party that conspires against one of the primary candidates, even if it's unsuccessful, or even if that candidate would have lost anyway, that doesn't change the fact that it's still an undemocratic measure taken. And then in 2024, when we have Joe Biden removed from the ballot, despite the fact that he was the one who won, and there's not a snap primary, and you have somebody put into power who was not selected as the president, there's no guarantee she would have beat any other primary contestant. The only reason why there wasn't significant pushback against this was because, due to party pressure, Biden's delegates were going to be sent over to Kamala anyway because they were loyal to whatever Biden said, and Biden was being pressured by top party officials like Nancy Pelosi and Obama. So when you have heads of parties selecting the candidates, I think this is less democratic. And if people want to go back to that, I think this is a threat to democracy. The actual threat, obviously all threats are based on probability and based on severity. Even if I agree that January 6th was perhaps higher severity than what we're seeing now with Kamala Harris taking over the primary over Joe Biden, it absolutely, in terms of probability, was absurdly low, right? The actual risk of something like that being successful, based on the fact that it didn't even get off the ground, based on the fact that he couldn't even convince his own vice president to get involved with the plan that Eastman proposed, that John Eastman proposed, and using the 12th Amendment potentially to undermine the Electoral College, I think pales in comparison to the very real reality that we have right now, which is that Joe Biden, despite the fact that he won the primary, is not the candidate. Kamala Harris is, because DNC officials made it that way. And let's not like stick our heads in the sand and pretend that like America, political parties, like they're this thing, like, they're not really involved. They're just sort of like this thing. They are more than just a thing. Like, we live in a two-party system, more or less. That's how the current system operates. It is Democrats versus Republicans. The fact that Kamala Harris is running as a Democrat dramatically reduces the opportunity for Democratic primary voters to select somebody else.
What were your questions, Wick?
I do have some questions. Which one of you wants your question first? I'll give it to Econoboy because we haven't heard from him in a while.
All right, let's do it.
Econoboy.
Tough question.
I think it's a little tough. So
Only the toughest questions.
Regardless of,
From Wick
I
TV.
understand your distinction between American democracy and democracy writ large as a concept. But do you not see, or do you not think that the erosion of democracy as a concept amongst primaries, amongst getting third parties removed from ballots, etc., can also lead to an undermining of the respect that people have for the American democratic product? You mentioned earlier in your opening, I believe, that democracy is almost like a fiat currency, right? People have to believe it works in order for it to continue to work. So do you not think that if what Lactoid is alleging is true, that when these attacks on little d democracy occur, that it can help undermine American democracy as a whole? What would be your response here?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would use many international examples to kind of prove this to be the case. I think what's more important when we're talking about internal party disputes and internal party deliberations is that you have a rules-based order and that those rules are followed, right? And insofar as the rules that the internal committees of parties have come up with are being followed, I think that's mostly essentially okay. I'll take the UK as an example. Take the Conservative Party in the UK. The process that they have is they essentially have their elected Conservative MPs nominate people, typically within the bunch. It's, typically a member of parliament. I don't think it technically has to be the case. Nominate someone to be the prime minister, essentially their presidential equivalent, right? And then amongst those people, they vote to forward a final 2 candidates, assuming that there's 2 that make it to the final ballot. A lot of the times one of them ends up dropping out. And then people who pay and who are card-carrying members of the Conservative Party, they vote. This can be a huge minority of the population. It's not just conservative-leaning voters. It's just people who are card-carrying members. It's individual MPs who nominate candidates. Now, every time a party does this in the UK, there's some haranguing, oh, this wasn't very democratic. I can't believe they would do this. But ultimately, it doesn't really go anywhere because that's the decision of the Conservative Party of the UK. If you don't like that internal process, guess what? You can vote for reform. You can vote for Labour. You can vote for the Green Party. You can ultimately vote for the process that you believe in and obviously interact within that process. The Labour Party has a similar process as well. The Democratic Party has a process, they engage in a process, rules-based process for replacing a candidate who dropped out. We can say, oh my goodness, well, Biden dropped out because of pressure. Last I checked, it wasn't illegal or anti-democratic for party leaders to go to somebody and say, hey, we don't think you can win. We really want you to drop out. We're going to engage in political pressure to get you to drop out. There's nothing anti-democratic about that. It's like saying it's anti-democratic for me to say you should vote for Kamala instead of Trump because I think Trump is bad. Like, it's just expressing a preference, right? And that rules-based order was followed. The convention happened. The delegates voted for Kamala. She ends up winning, right? I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Even if there was even if the way that the DNC picks its candidates is, the current president or the current speaker of the Senate, whoever the highest-ranking Democratic elected official is, just picks who the nominee is going to be, right? We might say, yeah, that's pretty anti-democratic. That's not a very deliberative process, right? But it's not a threat to American democracy because at the end of the day, this is just the Democratic Party representative. People can vote for whoever they want. They can write in whoever they want. And at the end of the day, that's the choice of people to vote for the candidate that the Democrats decided on.
Okay. Lactoid, do you have a response to that? If not, I'll just ask.
I guess my response is that I would assert, again, in the definition that I proposed, I'm not denying that this is legal. Things can be undemocratic or a threat to democracy and still be legal, right? It would be perfectly legal tomorrow if Congress all got together and decided, you know what, we're abolishing all 3 branches of government, we're abolishing the Constitution, we're abolishing everything, and we're making Trump God, dictator of the whole country, and now everything that he says is law. This would be legal if it actually got the votes to change the Constitution to do that. But I think it would be a threat to democracy. And I think people advocating for that would be advocating for the end of democracy. And I think here's a question for you, I think, to really challenge this. You kept saying that, parties, it's a rule-based system. So as long as things are done by the rules, if you don't like the rules, you can advocate for change. So let's assume for a second that John Eastman was right on January 6th. Let's just assume. And the 12th Amendment actually does allow for Pence to not select electoral slates from certain slates. Now that it's legal, if Pence does that, if Pence refuses to pick certain slates, is this no longer a threat to democracy because now it's legal?
Yeah, so I don't disagree with the idea that you can engage in sort of legal means to undermine the threat of democracy. Your example of a constitutional amendment to abolish all checks and balances, I guess that would be legal, right? But it would obviously still be a threat to democracy. The point that I'm making is that even if the Democrats had a hyper undemocratic process for selecting their candidate, that's not a statement on the American democratic system, right? That's a statement on the democratic nature of the Democratic Party's nomination process for president. That's a very, very different statement. The Libertarian Party, for instance, you mentioned, they don't have a real primary system, right? They end up going to the convention and just voting on the floor for their candidate. Are we going to say that the Libertarian Party is a huge threat to democracy? Let's just say that they were a major party, and they were, getting 25-30% of the vote. I mean, that's just how they decide to organize their own party's process. It's a private organization, right? So I don't really find that to be a big threat to democracy. At the end of the day, if I don't like the candidate that the Democrats put forward, the guy who has Democrat next to his or her name, I don't have to vote for that person, right? It's not a determining factor on who becomes president. It's ultimately up to voter preference, and it's the voter preference that Donald Trump tried to undermine when he tried to throw out votes for people who voted against him in the various states that he campaigned in. That's why he is a much bigger threat to the American democratic process than the Democrats. It's just, it's certainly not as relevant a factor in my view.
The thing I would disagree with is just I think that when you're taking a look at the American democratic process, I think it's short-sighted to not realize that primaries in a two-party system are a major part of that process, right? It's going to be two parties because that's the boat that we're in right now. And the system that selects those candidates for each of the two parties is critical in order to maintain a democracy. Again, I'm not saying that it's necessarily illegal what they did to Biden and how Kamala took over. There was some question about challenging that. It really didn't go anywhere. I said as soon as I heard about it, I'm like, that's probably not going to go anywhere. I agree that legally they probably can do that, just like legally they probably could have superdelegates, just like legally, electors could just refuse to vote for the person that their state votes for. Faithless electors. There's nothing illegal about that. But I would argue that faithless electors are undemocratic. And I think that trying to convince an elector to vote against the candidate that their state voted for is undemocratic. It's a threat to democracy. And organizing systems to try to undermine the will of the people in this case, to establish oligopolic control and party control over the system in a two-party system is a threat to democracy. And it's a threat to democracy that's been realized in a way that simply wasn't realized with Donald Trump in January 6th.
Mayonnaise to the max for $2. Does everyone vote for blueberry pie this election? I'm a pumpkin pie man myself, but blueberry pie, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think either is a threat to democracy in this case. Thank you for the $2. Lactoid, question for you. Do you accept the distinction that Econoboy has been attempting to make here between the American democracy writ large, right? Meaning federal elections, state elections, general elections, referendums, bills, etc., versus the primary democracy, which he says and claims is less important and is less connected to the whole.
He clearly doesn't. He's already explained that, Wick. Come on.
That is true. But I'd love an opportunity just to reiterate my position.
Reiterate everything.
Thank you so much, Wick. No, I think it's obvious that this has a major impact, and I think it's obvious by the Democratic Party's own actions. There's a reason why they're suing to try to get Jill Stein off the ballot, despite having dubious legal arguments.
Let's start on that, right? Like, do you think that there is ever a situation in which it is okay for a Democratic Party to try to sue the others for getting someone off a ballot? Under what conditions do you think that a party or an individual can try to remove someone else from a ballot and it not be a threat to democracy, if any?
I think there might always be like some element of a threat, but like I think that changes pretty like exponentially when we're talking about somebody like Jill Stein, who consistently has gotten like, again, small percentage overall because we are in a two-party system, but like still a relatively large number of votes. Jill Stein qualified in Wisconsin. Jill Stein qualified to be on the ballot, right? And the legal challenges that were put forward were borderline frivolous, right? And they didn't go anywhere. The Supreme Court ruled against them. But there is a concept known as vexatious litigation, where you can attack somebody if you have sufficient resources. You can attack somebody legally to try to disrupt their rights, to try to disrupt their standing, and it can be relatively effective. Jill Stein specifically, one of the reasons that I think she was able to resist the attack was because she got help from the RNC. The RNC stepped in and essentially said, we're going to help defend you and help you keep you on the ballot since you qualified to be on the ballot. And that's what happened. The DNC has, and this is, by the way, this has happened in 2020 as well. There was multiple cases of this happening. The fact that you have the DNC attempting to get third-party candidates off the ballot, what's the motivation to do that? Even let's say, assuming that they are within their legal rights, what's the motivation to do that? The motivation to do that is they don't want people voting for Jill Stein, even if Jill Stein aligns with their preferences. That's the obvious reason.
But Lactoid, by that logic, the Democrats are the pro-democracy party because they're fighting to keep RFK on the ballot in these, various circumstances. Now you could say, well, hey, he dropped out. He said, hey, he doesn't want to run anymore, but so did Joe Biden, right? So by that logic, getting rid of Joe Biden is not very anti-democratic either, because he said he just didn't want to run anymore, right? Now, on the third party issue specifically, what I would say is that obviously I would say that insofar as like Jill Stein legitimately qualified for the ballot, now every state has a different rule. I'm not, I have no idea even close to what the exacting nature of the rules are in all these various different states, but insofar as she plainly met the requirements to be on the ballot, she should be on the ballot. Insofar as she maybe didn't, I mean, challenges should be fine. Obviously, if you just didn't meet the requirements, I would say probably not a good thing to just let anybody on a ballot no matter what, especially if there's rules established in that regard. But it just seems moronic to me to say, oh, well, this lady who gets at most 1% of the vote every time she runs for an election, throwing her off the ballot in various states. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? That's super anti-democratic. But Donald Trump attempting to throw out like millions and millions of ballots that people cast legitimately in favor of Joe Biden in 2020, well, that's not as big a deal as trying to kick off Jill Stein in several states. Now, look, I would agree. I said the one point that you have here is that if you can show me a case where Jill Stein's legitimately on the ballot in some of these states and they're just trying to like lawfare their way and just get her kicked off the ballot, that's not good, obviously, right? I guess in that regard, you'd have to give credit to the Democrats for trying to keep RFK on the ballot at the same time. So there's maybe some mixed credit that we would assign here. But it's obviously a bigger deal that Donald Trump is a clear threat to the legitimate voter preference of people in these various states. The threat, just in terms of aggregate ballots getting thrown out, right? It's obviously Donald Trump in 2024 if he gets elected again.
Okay, $20 from Draven, 1895. Weird how Trump didn't debate in the primary since he wasn't an incumbent. Kind of seems anti-democratic, but hey, I'm just a regard. And then $5 more from Manny to the max. We need more parties. Vote third party. Make all politicians actually fight for your vote. Wick pumpkin pie is good, but sweet potato pie is better. No, pumpkin pie.
That's cringe. That's cringe. Come on, guys.
Thank you for the $5. I do appreciate that. But Lactoid, RFK Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Let's discuss that for a minute.
Sure.
Because I have questions on that. RFK Jr. wants off the ballot, right? I understand. But if his voters still want him on, which is the more anti-democratic choice here, right? To remove him regardless of the will of his voters, or to remove him because the candidate himself wanted to be removed?
It's a difficult question. The reason why I think it's important to talk about RFK being removed from some, or the DNC fighting to remove him from some ballots and keep him on other ballots, is because I think it really highlights what the motivation of the DNC actually is, right? When it benefits them to let people vote for people who are not them, then they're going to, push for that defense.
You recognize the Republicans are doing literally the same thing by fighting to keep Jill Stein on the ballot. You recognize they're doing the same. You think Republicans, because they're committed small d Democrats, are fighting to keep Jill Stein on the ballot and it has no strategic implications for their party? That's your opinion?
Who have they fought to get off the ballot?
Oh my God! Come on!
No.
They're fighting to get RFK off the ballot because it's strategically good for them.
No, we can talk about RFK. I was in the middle of talking about RFK. When we're talking about Jill Stein here, I think there's a substantive difference between you have a candidate who wants to be on the ballot, who's not being pressured to be off the ballot, right? They actually want to be on the ballot. They're not being pressured to be on the ballot. They want to be on the ballot, and there's a lot of people who vote for that particular party. And then an unfair mechanism coming in through the DNC to try to remove that option, right? That was part of my definition before, to remove that option from the voters. And the RNC saying no, like that's bullshit, right? When it comes to RFK specifically, I think the RFK situation is different, I think, than the Joe Biden situation. I'm not convinced that Joe Biden would have left the primary absent the pressure that was exerted onto him by party officials. I'm also critical of the fact that there wasn't a snap primary and the voters didn't get to pick who would come next. When it comes to RFK, who was in a different party, right? I'm not convinced in the same way that there was significant pressure from his party in order to get him to stop running. It appears to be due to his own motive here as to why he's trying to get off the ballot. Even then, I'm more focused on Jill Stein than I am RFK, because I think that there is more questions when it comes to RFK potentially, sure. But I think the fact that the DNC is trying to keep him on some and trying to remove him on others is simply just a window into their actual motivation here, right? And I want to just finish by pointing out, right, when we're going down the list of all these different Democratic things that they're doing, which I agree with you, removing one lawsuit against RFK in New York, that alone is probably not comparable to January 6th, for sure, right? But we have to look at things in the aggregate, right? We look at the fact that we're having lawsuits to remove third-party candidates all over the country, take all of that in aggregate. Then we look at the fact that Kamala Harris is now your candidate, right? And then Joe Biden is not the candidate. Take that in aggregate. Sure, the queen, right? That's take that into the aggregate. And then we take in the fact that we have the new candidate, by the way, which due to this one fact alone really makes me wish you guys kept Joe Biden on, which is that in 2019, she threatened a court pack, right? I think that's going to cause major disruption to the Constitution, which was also part of my definition of a threat to American democracy in this case. So, yeah, I'm concerned that when you take a look at all the different ways that the Democrats play dirty, and the only response that ever comes up to all these allegations is, oh, yeah, I mean, there's questions, but look at Trump, right? Trump did Jan 6th. Sure, we can talk. And I started off by not even denying that January 6th does give Trump like an element of threat to democracy. But it's not comparable in this case.
Just a little sprinkle of a threat to democracy.
High severity, low probability, right? High severity, low probability. I agree. Even if Eastman was right, even if it is the case that the 12th Amendment allows the vice president to not count certain slates of electors, it would make me uncomfortable and it would be anti-democratic if he did so. Faithless electors, even if they can legally do so, it's fucked. It's fucked that they can legally do so. They shouldn't be able to legally do so. And I think it's the threat to democracy if they decide to do so. Those are all fucked. Even if they're legal, it's absolutely fucked. I'm not denying that. The question is one of probability and severity. And we're seeing the probabilities realized with the Democratic Party.
Go ahead, Econoboy.
I think if you're risk weighting things, right, there's sort of an expected value of something, right? There's like an expected damage to democracy, even if you're doing it that way. Well, what Trump is doing is very, very severe, but the probability is very low. What the Democrats are doing is maybe low severity, but the probability is very, very high, right? So if we have this sort of like expected damage to democracy, even operating under that framework, it's just like very clear that the Democrats aren't a very big threat to democracy, right? When we're talking about like internal party anti-democratic practices, right? At the end of the day, the voter preference is literally basically unaffected by that. At the end of the day, you can always write in whoever you want. You can vote third party if you want. You at the end of the day, you just essentially don't have to vote for the Democrat. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be a member of the Democratic Party in general, right? And even if you are, you don't have to necessarily directly participate in their process. So the severity of that is obviously very, very low. And it's also arguably not very anti-democratic at all, but we don't have to rehash that. When it comes to third-party ballots, it just seems preposterous to compare the attempts to kick off to attempt to strategically kick off third-party candidates, which both parties have engaged in for literally decades and decades and decades. Google Republican tries to kick off Libertarian, hit news on your Google search. You'll find dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of stories of Republicans trying to kick off Libertarians from ballots because they feel like Libertarians are the spoiler candidate. For them, you'll find the exact same thing with Democrats trying to get rid of the Green Party. And again, if we're going to, play that game, the Democrats are pro-democracy when they're fighting for RFK to stay on the ballot. The Republicans are pro-democracy, I guess, when they're fighting for Jill Stein to get on the ballot. But it's obviously both very strategic decisions. Like both parties engage in this behavior. I don't really think we can really say that one is necessarily worse than another. And if we want to move on to the court packing thing, we can. I mean, Harris is a member of this administration. This administration had unified government for 2 years. There was literally never even a proposal from the administration to pack the court. There still isn't. There still is no proposal. It's not on the Democratic platform. It's not something Kamala is running on this time around. I'm not sure the exact quote that you're talking about. You said she threatened court packing in, I guess, 2020. Maybe she did. I mean, it's not something... Sure. I mean, it's not something she's running on today. I'd be willing to bet the day that Kamala gets elected, I'd be willing to bet, $10,000 that there's not going to be a packed court because of Kamala Harris. It's just clearly not a major issue for Kamala or like actually incumbent Democrats. There's like a very small sect of activist online Democrats who think, including myself, I guess, who think that court packing could be a good thing, but it's not like a serious threat in the sense that it's probably just like not going to happen, even if you think that court packing is a serious threat to democracy. But again, like this is all in an effort. The last sentence. This is all in an effort to essentially throw out what is in reality the strongest threat to the American democratic voter preference in like American history, right? I guess outside of the Civil War. We had an incumbent president use every legal means that he could. We had an incumbent president use every sort of boutique niche legal theory that he could think of to try and throw out the ballots of millions and millions and millions of Americans who legitimately just wanted him to be thrown out of office, right? And that's not to mention something you haven't responded to is the idea that his attempt to do this and his continued rhetoric on this issue has engendered the lowest faith in democracy on record in American history. And again, democracies need faith to survive. So who's the bigger threat to democracy? The guy who tried to throw out millions of ballots and engender an incredible lack of faith in our democratic process, illegitimately, mind you, or the party who engages in the same practice that the other party does and certainly isn't going to propose court packing when they actually win? I think that the answer is clear. It's obviously the Republicans.
I'll let you respond in a second. $5 from Draven 1895 to say Biden was a one-term president by choice. Salute emoji, glasses emoji, and eagle emoji. So thank you for the $5. Okay, respond, Lockdoor. Go ahead.
I would agree that when it comes to the things like the primary process, lawsuits against party officials, the lawfare against Trump, I wouldn't say low severity. You categorize that as low severity. I would categorize it as those things as probably moderate severity, perhaps in some cases moderate to high, or perhaps with the lawsuits against RFK, perhaps moderate to low. But we have confirmed probability, right, with a lot of that. We have confirmed probability with the lawsuits. We have confirmed probability with the primary process. When it comes to the, I guess, doomsday scenarios, like the court packing, I think that you have an extraordinarily high severity of harm there, I agree, a small probability, right? I think there's probably, probably the probability of court packing is, I think, probably a little bit higher than Donald Trump taking over the country and becoming dictator, right? So I think that the probability is probably higher than that. But the severity, I think, is significantly high, right? It's not moderate. It's going to be extraordinarily high severity. I think court packing is a existential threat to the republic, and the fact that we have somebody running who said multiple times that she's okay with that. I haven't seen any retraction of that statement. I agree she's talking about it less, but the fact that she was, it's so odd to me. There's an I want my cake, and I want to eat it too thing happening where Kamala Harris is part of the administration when it comes to counting her as in part of the primary process. Well, they voted for her anyway. But then actually, and she's part of the administration when it comes to, the Supreme Court decisions. But all of a sudden that she's not part of the administration when it comes to, political arguments saying that she's not responsible for some of Biden's failures that we're seeing right now in the debates and on rhetoric online. I think that it's true that Kamala Harris is part of the administration, but she's not the president, and she doesn't have nearly as much power as the president. And Joe Biden, to give him credit, has not been as reckless with court packing threats as Kamala Harris has. I haven't been able to find Joe Biden directly threatening court packing at all, right? So I'm going to give him that credit. But that's not the same as Kamala Harris, who is running for president. I think that the severity there is a concern. When it comes to Republicans kicking off libertarians, I'm not aware of any lawsuits in this election or maybe even last election of that occurring. If you have evidence of that, I would absolutely take a look at that, and I could absolutely condemn them, and I would factor that in to my calculation as to who is the bigger threat to democracy. Because if that is occurring, as a libertarian first and foremost, if you don't live in a swing state, I would highly advise you to vote for the Libertarian Party. I think you're throwing your vote away otherwise. I would take major issue with that, and I would potentially I don't know if at this point that would actually flip the calculation, but it would certainly make it a lot closer. In terms of the lowest faith in democracy and that democracies need faith, I don't disagree that democracies need faith, but that's all wrapped up again in this calculation that I'm making, right? One of the pillars of American democracy, I think, include things like the Supreme Court, right? In terms of the establishment of the Constitution and the third branch of government within that Constitution, and making sure the Constitution is stable. But I wouldn't call this a pillar, but it is just a reality, which is the primary process and the fact that we vote in the primary for candidates we want. If the RNC decided Ted Cruz was the candidate and Donald Trump wasn't, right? Let's say they organized some kind of way to force him off the ballot. I think that the most RNC voters wouldn't accept that. They would not accept that, and they may still vote for him. Let's say if he was running against Joe Biden, but that wouldn't mean that their vote was actually accounted for, and that there's not this sort of oligopolic control within the party. The last thing I just want to point out again with the January 6th thing, we keep going back to this, right? I understand why. This is like the thing that I think is what makes Trump. Yeah, it's the thing that makes Trump like a threat to democracy. I think there's a problem there for sure. But again, this has already been calculated in, and I'm for the purposes of this topic, I don't blame you for bringing it up, but I am a little bit tired of on Twitter or in other discussions or in discussions where I'm just pointing out things that Democrats do bad. They just keep going back to this thing. They can never you've been.
I can bring up
more
charitable if you want.
Sure. Can you answer the libertarian? Have libertarians been under subject of any lawsuits this election or last election by Republicans to get them removed off the ballot? Do you know?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, if you just Google Republican tries to kick Libertarian off ballot, you get tons and tons of stories of Republican Party apparatuses trying to do that. Now, in terms of your question on Chase Oliver versus the National Republicans, I'm honestly not sure. Just as I admitted, I'm not sure of the technicalities of the Democrats doing the same thing with Jill Stein. But one example. I mean, it seems ridiculous to me when you say, well, I'm very scared of 4 years ago, Kamala mentioned, I guess, like she might want to pack. I'm not sure exactly. You haven't read a quote off, so I'm not sure exactly what she said.
I'll find it.
Kamala signaled that she might be open to packing the court or adding members of the court, even though that is a process that's happened in our republic before. We've added justices. I believe we've taken away justices as well. Seems like things have moseyed on about ever since then. Pretty fine, let's just say. But one thing that we've never had a termination of the Constitution. That's what Donald Trump said that he would advocate for. But for some reason, Mr. Libertarian here, the guy says he wants to terminate the Constitution. Haven't had a single mention of that. But for some reason, we're so scared of Kamala adding justices to the court when it's not part of the Democratic platform. She's never signaled support for that in her presidential campaign this time around, which is probably a relevant factor, considering, as we know, Kamala's had many changes of heart since becoming the presidential candidate in 2024. Not sure why this would be any different. But we don't care about Trump saying he thinks it would be legitimate to terminate the rules of the Constitution. That's just something we think isn't a big deal, but we're going to overweight, Kamala's threat to packing the court. I mean, Lactoid, this just seems ridiculous. I agree with you. If by your framework and by I think most people's frameworks, I even said that the kicking off the third parties thing is not that's not pro-democracy, let's say. Each party in like their own, special little way is like some marginal threat to the democratic process, right? But it's obviously a package deal, right? There are things that Democrats advocate for that I think are very pro-democracy, things like protecting the voting process, ending gerrymandering, maybe getting rid of the Electoral College and making an actual democratic process for selecting the president. All of these things are actually pro-democracy measures. Enfranchising people in Puerto Rico, D.C., again, pro-democracy measures. Trump is against all of those things, plus he did threaten to throw out millions of ballots. It just seems trivially obvious that it's the case that of the two parties, the more anti-democracy party, certainly based on the polling of their own members and based on the rhetoric of their candidates, it's clearly Donald Trump, the guy who said he thought terminating the Constitution would make sense.
No, look, I'm glad you brought that up, right? So that particular comment, that tweet, I criticized it the day it was made. And that specific comment was something that I've been criticizing in right-wing circles going on for a long time now. That absolutely goes into the calculation. I don't disagree with that. I'm not going to defend that comment either. The Constitution is first and foremost. It is sacrosanct. It is the thing that holds this country together. It is America, really. I mean, this country is not based off like any sort of ethnicity like a lot of European countries are. This country is based off the Constitution. That is the fabric that's America. The Constitution is America. So, yeah, horrible comment to make. But when it comes to respect for the Supreme Court and obeying what the Supreme Court rules, right? And when it comes to not threatening the integrity of the Supreme Court, when it comes to the justices that are selected to the Supreme Court coming from originalist institutions like the Federalist Society, as opposed to living Constitution theorists, right? I think that the actions of Donald Trump pose less of a threat to democracy as opposed to his tweets being pretty fucking bad. Okay, so perfectly
Well, but
fine thing.
if we're using that,
Perfectly fine thing to bring up. I'm not denying
if
that's
we're
something to bring up.
yeah, but if we're using that framework, the actions of Kamala has never been to pack the court or to undermine the legitimacy of the, let's say, court selection process, but the actions of Donald Trump have certainly been to undermine the democratic process of this country.
Well, no. So the action. Well, okay. If we're talking about January 6th again, like we can make that argument. But if we're talking about as it regards the Supreme Court, I think that Donald Trump has been significantly better when it comes to establishing a Supreme Court that is based on what I believe to be the only credible theory of law. But also, more importantly, not even threatening to destabilize that entire branch of government. I would agree with you that if Kamala Harris did actions that would actually further packing the court, she would be immensely more of a threat than she is now, right? I think that any president that does this, and I've said this multiple times, if at any point Donald Trump tomorrow comes out and says, we're going to pack the court, or, we're done selecting justices from the Federalist Society, we're just going to start picking, pro-Trump judges and judges that are, I think there's like a new legal theory, which is like constitutional conservatism or ridiculous legal concepts that are just really nothing but right-wing hackery. If he comes out and says that, then any kind of potential of him getting my vote is gone, right? I mean, that is the red line in the sand for me because of how critical that is to the actual functioning of the republic. Kamala Harris has threatened that already. She has said that she's specifically the quote here is, I'm open to this conversation about increasing the number of people on the United States Supreme Court. And then she said multiple times when it comes to Politico, at the time, quote, everything is on the table to restore confidence in the Supreme Court, including court packing. And then at the debate, when she was debating Mike Pence on this issue, Mike Pence held her feet to the fire and said, hey, are you going to pack the court? Are you guys going to pack the court? Are you going to pack the court? And we didn't get an answer. We got dodge after dodge after dodge. It was honestly one of her worst moments in the debate. It should be a very easy answer. But that level of, I think, flippancy and recklessness when it comes to something as important as the Supreme Court it makes me scared. It makes me doubt her and her statements. And it makes me doubt whether or not when she gets elected, she might try something terrible.
Before
Yeah,
you
but my
respond to
point-
Connor, before you respond to Connor, but just a housekeeping thing.
Housekeeping.
When do you have to leave again? Just I want to
I've got about 20 minutes.
Okay, great. We got about 20 more minutes with this. Okay.
Yeah.
Respond.
Yeah, I mean, I hope the people watching this can hear at least how absurd that sounds from my perspective, and I'll try to elucidate my perspective, right? So Lactoid's essentially saying, well, at one point, Kamala said she was open to the conversation of court packing. It's like, okay, according to Lactoid, that's like the worst thing that you can do for democracy, or at least our democratic norms, basically expand or shrink the court. Look, it's happened several times in the past. Lactoid might say that this is unique, right? When John Adams strategically shrunk the court and Thomas Jefferson added to the court, that maybe wasn't as big a deal. The other, I think, 3 or 4 times that the court was expanded, maybe that wasn't as big a deal, even though I think there's good evidence to say that those were politically motivated expansions as well. Look, the Republic didn't fall apart when that happened. But again, I could understand at least the argument these are unique times in that regard. Kamala said she was open to it. And he goes on to say, well, it's important, that kind of reckless rhetoric, right? That kind of reckless rhetoric when it comes to packing the court that's just crazy, right? That's a line for Lactoid. And we can draw all of our own lines that we want, not unreasonable. But the standard does seem to be ridiculous to say that that's reckless rhetoric. And that's a line in the sand for me. But I'm willing to say people should maybe strategically vote for Donald Trump in swing states. I'm willing to say that people shouldn't take Donald Trump's threat to democracy or the Constitution as seriously as Kamala is saying, I'm open to court packing, a historical process in this country. What's not a historical process is saying, find me 11,000 votes, throw out millions of votes that people legitimately cast. What's not a legitimate process is let's terminate the Constitution. This guy says reckless rhetoric surrounding court packing. This guy right here says reckless rhetoric regarding court packing. That's a big deal. We can't have it, right? That's a red line in the sand for me. But all of a sudden, a presidential candidate, waxing poetic about terminating the Constitution, we're looking the other way on that one, right? That just seems like a double standard to me, and it doesn't really seem particularly consistent for the guy who just said America is the Constitution, right? So we have a candidate who says we're going to get rid of the foundation of America, the idea of America. That's what Donald Trump has pondered about, said that he's open to, in fact, openly called for, right? But Kamala says she's open to court packing. And all of a sudden we think that's the downfall of the Republic. You understand why I would say that that sounds ridiculous, Lactoid.
No, I don't, because I said I was the one who kind of went on waxing for a second about how I disliked that tweet and how that's factored into the calculation here.
But what?
And
But
about- and
that's the
about how-
question. Why do you dislike that less than Kamala saying she's open to court packing? It doesn't seem reasonable.
So yeah, between those two, I don't think it's unreasonable at all. Like there was a tweet in which he mentions terminating the Constitution. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. I don't see a process explained. I don't see any sort of it's nebulous. It's a nebulous but bad statement to make, right? Its nebulousness, I think, reduces the level of severity and probability, as opposed to a very direct threat that we have historical evidence of occurring. We know that court packing can happen because, unfortunately, it has happened in the past. I would say that all those other times that you were talking about, those were all major trying times in the status of our republic. This was incredibly important. This was horrible, right? I'm not going to defend any of those particular cases of court packing, especially the ones that were like specifically. There was I don't have the exact years down, but there was several in which it was specifically for political reasons, and that is incredibly disturbing, right? And I think that if that was to happen today, I think anytime that happens, there is a risk of complete destruction of the country, right? And the fact that we were able to make it through that is nothing short of a miracle. The fact that we were able to make it through the Civil War, I think, was nothing short of a miracle. Despite the fact that we were able to make it through FDR's threats of court packing, which, even though he wasn't necessarily successful in those threats, in terms of actually packing the court, he did manage to push changes to the Supreme Court in order to get a lot of terrible things done, right? The FDR court was, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions, the worst court in probably since Dred Scott, all right? We're talking about a court that decided it was fine to put Japanese people in camps. We're talking about a court that was fine with removing the concept of interstate commerce. We're talking about a court that was fine with, free speech gives you protection of speech, but if you call a cop a fascist and the cops beat the shit out of you, well, then you kind of had it coming because them's fighting words. Absolute is insane judgments, and I think that demonstrates how low we can sink when we have a Supreme Court that becomes vulnerable to the political influence of somebody like FDR, somebody who is technically following the law potentially, but really undermining the spirit of the Constitution. And so I think Kamala's threats, even though it's low probability, I agree, compared to the shit that she's already done, aka even being a candidate, the severity is high there enough for me to be concerned. And I give you credit with the Trump tweet. It was not a good tweet. I will never defend that tweet. If any conservatives defend that tweet, I will fight them. Horrible tweet to make. But again, it's nebulous. It's not the same level of specificity. And I don't know what the fuck it means. He's going to terminate the Constitution. Bizarre statement to make.
Hard to imagine what a termination of civil liberties would look like. A libertarian can't possibly imagine a government terminating civil liberties. That sounds pretty unbelievable to me.
Okay. I'll let you respond more than a quip if you'd like, but a couple super chats. $5 from Draven1895. Remember when Trump said he would suspend the Constitution? Question mark.
We just talked about that.
Question.
Oh, yeah.
And then non-fawn for $5. Does Lactoid think a democracy should have protections like Section 3, Amendment 14, to keep bad faith actors from using democracy against itself?
Is this person talking about the 14th Amendment, Section 3?
Yeah, 14th Amendment, Section 3. They wrote it backwards. I don't know why.
This is the insurrection quote. We had a whole debate on this. This was Pisco was part of that debate. No, I think that and by the way, there's a reason why. This had to do with the Colorado case, which is the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This is where this came up. We debated the Colorado case, in which we have Colorado kicking Donald Trump off the ballot, the primary ballot, which is hilarious that we're talking about, these are just private organizations, when you have the Supreme Court of Colorado going to kick Trump off the primary ballot, right? Obviously, there's some kind of involvement there with the government. But the Supreme Court ruled against that 9-0, right? 9-0s are incredibly rare. We have the 6, I would argue, real justices, and then the 3 sort of living constitution theorists that are on the Supreme Court, even they agree that this was unacceptable to rule that Donald Trump was disqualified in this case. I know there's a little bit of dodging on some of the merits as to the question of Section 3 specifically with the Supreme Court opinion. But no, I don't think the Section 3 applies in this case to anything that Donald Trump did.
I want to give it to Conaboy, and then I have a question for both of you. Conaboy.
Well, I think that Nanfan was really asking the harder philosophical question, not really the applied question, which was like, should democracies have rules like this? And I actually have struggled with this question for a long time, and I'm really truly not sure what the right answer is. Because, like, on one hand, you could say it's good to not allow explicitly anti-democratic candidates to win power and obviously get rid of democracy, right? But that leads to the applied question of like, well, how do you actually enforce such a thing that's sort of like pro-democratic in nature? Seems obviously very difficult. Even the Supreme Court, like Lactoid said, kind of sidestepped that as an issue. And it's very difficult. I'll say this. One fundamental thing that we have to keep in mind, it's the reason why I take the faith and democracy argument piece of this so seriously. And perhaps, Lactoid could talk more about it, but it's that there's probably nothing that you could do. There's no rule you could have. There's no set of norms that you could engender amongst maybe a slight majority of your population that is going to solve the problem of people just don't trust the democratic system, right? If 60% of your country just doesn't think that their vote matters, that's how you get like Iraqi democracy, where some small minority of people vote, but nobody takes it seriously, and there's boycotts every single election because nobody thinks it's really a big deal to vote. They don't really think the government's legitimate. They think the opposition's corrupt. Doesn't really matter who wins kind of thing, right? This is obviously very bad for democracy. And this is the kind of anti-faith in our system that Donald Trump has engendered. There's nothing wrong with investigating voter fraud. There's nothing wrong with saying that seems suspicious. We should probably look more into that. But when you go, through a months-long tour throughout the country saying that your votes were illegitimately cast, that they didn't count the votes in the states where I lost, but they counted too many of the votes in the states where I won. They didn't count enough votes in the states where I won by small margins or whatever it is. That's obviously completely ridiculous, and that's the kind of lack of faith that's engendered in a system like that. And that is sort of agnostic to institutional design. If so many people just don't trust your institution of voting for a preference and that preference being reflected in government, guess what? That's just what democracy is. And engendering a lack of faith in democracy itself, which Donald Trump has done, extremely dangerous.
Okay, so my question actually does tie into the faith in democracy thing, and it also ties in to event for if you just are turning in, right? If you have tuned in mid-debate, there has been a second apparent assassination attempt on President Trump. Shots were fired at his golf course, and a person has been detained. The suspect has been identified by CNN, or by law enforcement, and this is being reported by CNN, New York Post, and a few other organizations. The man's name is Ryan Wesley Routh. I don't know how to say his last name, honestly. And he has been taken alive in custody. There will be more updates to that. But this is the second attempt on a presidential candidate's life in as many months. And we have also seen rhetoric on the side of the more conservative-leaning people. We mentioned a Libertarian Party tweet from New Hampshire where they talked about how whoever murdered Kamala Harris would be a hero to America. That was the tweet that they sent out. Is this type of rhetoric due to the lack of trust in institutions? Are these actions due to this lack of trust in institutions? And if not, then why do we have much more of this election cycle than we've had in any I can remember? That's the question.
Yeah,
Whichever one wants to go first.
Can I?
Go for it.
I'm going to respond to some of the things that you said in the prior, and then tie it into this question. So specifically, how would you stop an undemocratic candidate from running? The philosophical question here. I agree, it's very hard. And I think that there probably is a real question as to how to effectively do that, and how you'd want to see that happen. Because I'd be very vigorously opposed to some kind of president who's going to abolish the Constitution, even if he could do so legally, and even if he had the democratic will of the people. If you had somebody who had the democratic will of the people who wanted to bring back slavery, super opposed to that, right? So much so in that case that it would really, I think, test my loyalty to this country and my devotion to the legitimacy, just because there's certain moral questions that for me are so pertinent that they overwhelm perhaps my desire for stability and my desire for my respect for the Constitution, which is very high, just to be clear. So there's nothing wrong with investigating voter fraud, which was said by Conaboy. That's what was done on the Georgia phone call that he brought up earlier, the quote, finding 11,000 votes, obviously dishonestly framed. I agree that we want to see trust in voting, which is arguably why we should be having voter ID, why we should be having rigorous rules around voting, such as removing things like ballot harvesting, having single day voting, et cetera, because I think things like that can help expand trust in the democratic institutions, even if the actual fraud evidence is questionable. The trust in of itself is important, and obviously that's going to be factored in. But again, it's the Republicans that are advocating for things like voter ID. The fact that every country in Europe besides the UK has voter ID, no problem, but for some reason we can't get ourselves around to it because we're concerned about it. I don't really know the arguments against it, really, but because I don't know if there is any real arguments against why we should just simply have it. To expand voter trust. The Republicans are the ones advocating for that. As to Donald Trump getting shot at potentially again, the second assassination attempt, really bad. I highly disavow any kind of assassination attempts. I disavow the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, as most libertarians already have, because that organization is fucking unhinged. And if you know anything about their history, they are unhinged. They are the absolute worst part of the libertarian movement. J.D. Vance was accused of being responsible for the bomb threats in Ohio because he was talking about that dog story. And I think this kind of goes into a little bit about, are people responsible? It sort of goes into the stochastic terrorism conversation that we had earlier, Wick, right? Are people responsible for what other people do just because they're genuinely advocating for a position and then some psycho takes it too far? I would say no, right? I'm not blaming Democrats necessarily for the attacks on Donald Trump. I think that there's certain rhetoric that can perhaps raise the temperature that we should avoid. And the people who engage in that rhetoric, I would want to calm them down. And I think I do a decent job at doing that in my interactions on this space, where I don't engage in the kind of aggressive kind of, we got to do this, like Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. But generally speaking, no, I'm not going to hold Kamala or Democrats responsible. I think this guy is responsible, and I think that it's unfortunate that this is happening. And I think it's telling a little bit as to just the level of TDS that, I mean, this guy, they're trying to kill him. They keep trying to kill him. It's fucked.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really... I really tend to take a quite conservative approach when things like this happen, depending on the circumstance. I think it was like the day that Trump almost got assassinated. I said, guys, this isn't going to move the polls very much. Like, don't freak out about this. Everyone was kind of having a meltdown, and I guess luckily for my own side, it turned out I was right about that. I guess, but and similarly, I would say the same thing here. I'm not sure how big a political impact something like this will have. We don't know anything about this guy, right? Like, it turns out the guy who tried to kill Trump the first time was some kind of anti-Semitic, like, Groyper type. At least that's the information that was, available to us that we knew about. Well, the clearest picture we can draw is one that this guy clearly had sort of right-wing, like, sort of Groyper-esque opinions, right? And so we don't know anything about this guy. This guy could be a sort of unaffiliated anarchist type guy who maybe wasn't, influenced by any particular, left-wing politician's rhetoric. I think that one of the reasons why you don't tend to find, like, I guess, shooters who are inspired by, like, Democratic politicians' rhetoric, I guess, knock on wood, of course, there's crazy people all over the place, is that, I don't know, I mean, we don't really find a lot of Democratic politicians, like relevant national politicians, saying, like, very radical things with regards to using violence or using very sort of, like, dodgy imagery with regards to violence. I just think that that's a criticism that genuinely falls more on the Republican politicians than the Democratic ones. But I'm glad that Trump wasn't killed yet again, and obviously, I'm glad this guy was caught alive, I guess. So presumably he'll be able to expound on what his motivations were at some point. So it'll be interesting to see.
I think the Steve Scalise shooting was directly inspired by Democratic rhetoric, specifically Bernie Sanders, I think.
I have to look into it.
And
It's been a while.
Yeah, so there has been shootings inspired by Democratic rhetoric, but I think the important thing here is, in the same way that I wouldn't hold J.D. Vance responsible for bomb threats in Ohio to like Haitian immigrants, and I wouldn't hold Donald Trump responsible for violence in the Capitol, right? Because again, he's not the one telling them to go do this. I think I'm being very consistent here in that I'm also not going to hold Bernie Sanders responsible for the Steve Scalise shooting, or any other Democrat for that matter. And I'm also not going to hold, even if it turns out this guy is like hyper progressive, I'm not going to say, well, Kamala did this, right? Kamala should be held responsible in any meaningful way. I might make a comment as like, well, this kind of like heated rhetoric is probably bad. We should probably avoid this. It can probably lead to these kind of situations. But there's a level of moral responsibility, I think, that's not there when you're not directing action, because I think that we have to balance that with the important priority that people should have, especially politicians, to speak their mind and to actually propose policy and to say, like, hey, if you think Trump is a threat to democracy or a threat to the republic, you should have the freedom of speech to do so. Just like I should have the freedom of speech to say that Kamala Harris is a threat to the republic, with things that she has said. But do you think there's a double standard here when it comes to like a lot of people saying, well, hey, Donald Trump said fight like hell, therefore there's a level of like personal responsibility on him for the violence that happened in the Capitol. But then when it comes to like, let's say the Steve Scalise shooting, or let's say it turns out this guy's a progressive even, would you blame progressives then? If it turns out this guy is a progressive, would you blame their rhetoric and calling Trump such horrible things for the shooting?
Well, I think foundationally there's kind of two axes. There's kind of like two axes I would use to evaluate the sort of, and this is kind of a different question than I guess like the debate that we're having here about threats to democracy. But
sorry, it's just like it just happened, and no,
you
guys are here, so I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm cool to answer the question. I mean, the two ways that I would kind of think about this is like, okay, well, what did the person actually say? Right? Because there's always going to be crazy people. I could say, hey, like, I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And then some crazy guy's like, oh, I saw a guy eating a burger, so I just killed him because I heard Econoboy say he liked peanut butter and jelly sandwiches one time. It's like, okay, well, that's not really my fault. This is clearly just a guy who's deranged, right? So how am I supposed to constrain myself in that regard, right? So there's one way to evaluate it. The second way is like, well, what's like the actual literal truth of what the people are saying, right? So like, for instance, let's say that I was, I think it was 1991 when David Duke was running for governor of Louisiana, and he was like the Republican nominee, right? If I was in Louisiana and I said, hey, like, I don't really trust this guy to be governor. He was part of the KKK. Like, the KKK historically has like killed a bunch of black people and like obviously engaged in a lot of like very racist politics, and I don't necessarily trust David Duke to like not do that. And let's say that, some activist shoots and kills David Duke and they say, oh, look at what Econoboy said. Like, he said David Duke was a threat to black communities. It's like, well, yeah, but he probably is, right? Like, it's true, right? He is. And so how much do you really blame the person for saying something that's just like literally seemingly the case? And so that, those are kind of the two ways that I would evaluate this. And, that's what we heard after Trump got attempted assassinated, I guess, in June or July or whenever it was, oh, well, the Democrats are saying that Trump is a threat to democracy. It's like, well, but he is a threat to democracy, right? Like, I don't know if he would really hold us responsible for saying something that we feel is just literally true, but I'll take J.D. Vance as an example here. If some crazy person's decided I'm going to take a gun and start shooting every Haitian that I saw in Springfield, I would blame J.D. Vance for that, because he did signal boost a conspiracy theory with regards to Haitians, and this guy probably wouldn't have done that if he didn't think Haitians were a threat when they're clearly not. Like, there probably is some level of responsibility with such a specific event happens and there's such specific rhetoric linking to that event, right? And also, it's fair to say that the rhetoric is just like a lie, right? Like, Haitians aren't going around eating people's cats and doing voodoo all over Springfield, right? Like, it's just crazy to say otherwise. So that's kind of how I would evaluate things like that, and like the responsibility that politicians would have for their rhetoric, or celebrities in general, just like major public figures.
Yeah, I firmly reject the idea that J.D. Vance should be held responsible for if there's violence against Haitian communities, even if it's true or false that there's wild animals and or pets being attacked in the state of
Can I give an
Ohio.
example though, Lactoid? What if, for example, what if I said, what if I said, Jews in New York are raping all of our women, and they're a threat to the foundation of the country, and Jews are just
Clip
the
it,
worst, right?
Kings. Okay,
Let's just
clip
say
it.
that I said that, and then there was a series of hate crimes directed towards Jewish people, and let's say that those people said, "Well, I heard from Akana Boy that Jews were raping all the women." You think I would have just like no responsibility for those hate crimes?
Yeah, I would not hold you personally responsible for those
Okay,
hate crimes. Again,
well,
I might criticize the rhetoric.
fundamental difference.
Sure, this is a
Fundamental
fundamental
difference.
difference because the problem is I think that if you go along these lines, it's a hop skipping away from book banning, right? Karl Marx, I think, his writings is responsible for millions of deaths, but I wouldn't ban that in schools, and I wouldn't necessarily hold him responsible, like personally, for the millions of people that were killed. Even though his ideology is terrible, and it, you could probably draw a direct link between his crazy beliefs, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a right to write those beliefs. That doesn't mean he should be punished for expressing those beliefs, and that doesn't mean that we should be removing the Communist Manifesto from libraries today. In the same way, and a lot of it's based on lies, and a lot of it's based on economic untruths, as I'm sure you know, right? Karl Marx had, labor theory of value. He was totally off in the woods when it comes to actual economic theory. He was essentially printing lies. But that's one of the things that you get to do when you live in a free country. You get to express your opinion. This is why we have freedom of religion. Arguably, all religions are contradictory with each other. And, potentially, according to any person who subscribes to one religion, all the other ones have to be false. But yet, we have the freedom to practice that religion and express those beliefs in a free country, even if it happens to be false. If J.D. Vance, you can criticize J.D. Vance for maybe speaking out of turn or speaking too quickly when it comes to allegations of Haitians eating pets and eating birds. And by the way, those allegations have been made by people there. But again, I agree with you. They have not been credibly investigated enough for me to back up that claim. But just because he happens to be repeating those testimonials that he's heard doesn't mean that he's responsible for some Looney Tune who happens to harm that community. Just like I'm not going to hold Bernie Sanders responsible for the Steve Scalise shooting, even though there is a tie there. I'm not going to tie in terms of his rhetoric and the actual outcome. Even if this guy turns out to be progressive, I'm not going to hold any particular progressive personally responsible for that. I'm going to be doing consistently what I've always done, which is, hey, let's talk about this like civilized adults. Let's recognize that if we're being stupid about this, I'm not denying your right to say this. I'm not ever going to punish somebody for saying this. But Jesus Christ, guys, come on.
Question for you, Lactoid, in this case, just to press on that a little bit, right? So say there was an assassination attempt on Trump, right? This guy, well, it just happened. There was. Say the guy had a manifesto and they're interrogating him and he says, I watched Destiny and Wick debate and I realized that Destiny was correct, that all these conservatives, all these Republicans are just worthless. And so because of his words, and I am saying this, because of his words, I did what I did. You wouldn't hold Destiny responsible at all.
I would not hold him personally, I wouldn't hold him in any kind of legal sense responsible. But I think you could probably even go further than that with Destiny, because he doesn't just talk shit about Republicans all the time. On your stream, he openly celebrated the death of a Trump supporter. And I think that he has a lot of fans, and there's some people who potentially could see that and say, well, I want to make him happy, and they might engage in that, right? Which would be horrible. But even then, I wouldn't say that Destiny deserves any kind of punishment, because we live in a free country. And in a free country, you get to say and do terrible things. And the appropriate place to hold people responsible is in the court of public opinion.
Question for you on Akana Boy. You say that you hold J.D. Vance responsible for some of the actions, the bomb threats that are happening in Ohio. Is that correct?
I don't know about the bomb threats, but I was just using that as an example. Like if somebody started committing hate crimes against Haitians, I would say it's obviously people like J.D. Vance's fault.
Even
for
if J.D. Vance
theory.
And it came out that he really did believe this to be true. He really did believe that this thing was happening, and he wanted to express his disdain for that thing, which he totally believed was happening. You'd still hold him responsible. When you say responsible, do you mean legally?
I really am not sure what the laws are with regards to that kind of thing. So it's possible.
Would you like there to be a law?
Would I like there to be a law? I mean, I don't
really
know.
Not already, right?
I guess I'm not sure what the conception of that law would look like. But like possibly, yeah, I'm open to that. I would just say that in general, you do have some sort of social responsibility for your words. I mean, like there might be people who, like for instance, there's probably a lot of Nazis who just like genuinely believe that Jewish people are evil, right? So like there might be some genuine beliefs that they have, but that doesn't mean that they're not responsible for very harmful rhetoric when their rhetoric causes harm. Now, to what regard they should be legally punished for something that is just purely rhetoric, very difficult to say. I mean, my guess would be that the framework in this country would be that you would err on the side of free speech and that they wouldn't be punished for it. But socially, it's like inarguable, right? That they, deplatforming and like, credit acts, whatever like the, social interactions that they could have, certainly they should face consequences for such harmful rhetoric, even if they're just like genuinely stupid and believe in complete nonsense. I mean, even Lactoid said like the lady who started that complete nonsense was some lady on Facebook who said that she thinks that this is what's happening. She came out later and said, "Oh, I didn't mean to start this like nationwide thing where a quarter of the country now thinks that there's a problem with Haitians eating cats." It's like, okay, well, I'm glad that she owned just being a complete dumbass on Facebook. Doesn't really completely negate, the harm that is caused obviously by this happening, where you've now probably got Haitians who are facing discrimination and stuff when they otherwise need not face such discrimination. But I do have to go soon, so if we could go into closing statements,
We can
then
go into closings.
that'd be
We
great.
can. Gang, we're not going to end the stream. I do want to talk to Lactoid a little bit more, and I want to cover the Trump assassination thing a little bit more and look deeper into it. But yeah, we're going to give some closing statements. So we're going to let Lactoid go first. He's going to give his closing statement, and we'll give Econoboy the last word. Gang, these people, I put links to their stuff in my YouTube description. Check them out, please. Give them a subscribe, a follow, what have you, right? Reward them from coming on my channel and giving you, my dear viewers, content. Let's start with Lactoid, and then we'll go to Econoboy, please.
Yeah, so I would just thank you to Econoboy for stepping in last minute. I think that it was very kind of you, just in terms of, and professional of you as well. So kudos to you for that. But I remain convinced at this point that of the original point that I made, which was that the Democrats are a threat to democracy. If we're going to have panels and discussions constantly about how Trump is a threat to democracy, I think it's also fair for me to say that Democrats are a threat to democracy without experiencing the sort of, well, what about Trump that we always get whenever Democrats face any kind of criticism for what they do. And then the second topic, which is the topic that was in discussion here today, I still remain convinced that Kamala Harris is a greater threat to democracy than Donald Trump is at this point in time. There could be things that could change that before the election, but at this point in time, I think that the combination of the aggressive lawsuits to remove third parties from candidates around the country, including Cornel West, RFK, and Jill Stein, essentially the coup of Joe Biden off the primary, and the replacement of him by Kamala Harris by the party elites within the DNC, which is following a trend with the DNC of acting undemocratically in order to let the elites establish favoritism over certain candidates over the will of the primary voter, I think is a concern. And what they're doing when it comes to the court and in terms of the kind of justices that they're nominating, but also the threats of court packing that were in place in 2019, which again was the last time that Kamala actually ran in a primary. So technically her most recent primary, these are the kind of things that she was arguing for. That's concerning. All of that is, I think, pitted against the real concerns that we have with Donald Trump. But I think that overall, I think that people exaggerate sometimes the risk of harm that Donald Trump is, and they tend to undervalue the risk of harm that Kamala Harris is. If you like what I had to say, you can find me at Lactoid TV on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. And thank you, Wick, also for putting this on.
Of course. Thank you for choosing my channel in which to argue against the people you want to argue with. I do appreciate that. Econoboy, close us out. And 2024 Gay Odyssey for $2 says, Econoboy, get that desecrated gay flag off your wall. Thank you for the $2. Okay, go ahead.
I've grown to like the modern gay flag myself, but I can understand why people like the original. But the intersex inclusive one, that's a pretty cool looking flag as well. But like greater minds are free to disagree on that.
It's getting ridiculous.
But yeah, just adding more complexity as we go along. But anyway, but Yeah, I guess overall, like Econoboy on YouTube and whatnot. Three Wonks is where we post more regular content, just because that's like a policy focused show. So if you want like more policy discussion, you can find me there as well. I guess overall, like foundationally, I try to take a very sort of like I just try to engage in as much historical analysis as we can. History is kind of like data for anthropological concerns and structures, right? So governance structures, look at history, how have they worked out before. Everything Lactoid said, we've had before and we've dealt before within this country. We've had less democratic primary sort of nomination systems, substantially less democratic than what we've had with Kamala and Biden, this election system, including in the Republican primary. Before, we've had, back and forths on major parties trying to get other candidates removed from ballots or strategically added to ballots because they're trying to take advantage of the spoiler effect. That's a criticism of our democratic structure writ large, which again is something that the Democrats would actually address with things like ranked choice voting, with things like getting rid of the Electoral College. That's what the Democrats are proposing as systemic solvencies to those problems. But Republicans are fine having that current system as it is. We've had political lawsuits and things like that have happened before. We've had court packing and court shrinking in a strategic sense in this country, but we've never had a president who was so anti-democratic in both his rhetoric and in his actions, obviously saying he would terminate the Constitution, saying that he, essentially trying to enact a plan to throw out millions of legitimately cast ballots. That seems to be the bigger deal. Lactoid says, well, he doesn't necessarily care about rhetoric as much. He cares about actions. Fact is, Democrats have never taken an action to actually pack the court. They've never taken an action to try and, let's say, instill a less democratic system. They've tried to make concerted actions to do the opposite. Get rid of gerrymandering, provide funding for voting systems and voting security, something Republicans were actually against, try to expand representation of American citizens like DC statehood, Puerto Rican statehood, maybe broader statehood for other territories, right? Those are pro-democracy things that you can do. I think it's just, frankly, I guess finally speaking, it's just kind of ridiculous in my view to say that the candidate who says we should terminate the Constitution, the candidate who says we should throw out millions of votes, that's the candidate who's not necessarily as big a threat as democracy as the potential of Kamala maybe packing the court because 4 years ago she said she was open to that conversation. They're more of a danger because they engage in this strategic third party lawsuit nonsense, which has happened historically, especially in the contemporary period, right? I just don't really think I don't take those probabilities very seriously or the magnitude of those things very seriously. And so, yeah, thanks for having me on, Wick. It was really fun subbing in. Hopefully Hutch won't run from the next debate he's scheduled with Lactoid. But I hope I was at least a pretty good sub in, and I hope you guys have fun for the rest of the stream.
I always appreciate you stepping in. Thank you so much. I do appreciate you. Econoboy, whatever you need to do for the rest of the day, I hope it goes swimmingly.
Sure.
Gang, give him a follow.
See you guys.
Give him a shout out. See you later, buddy. So let's take a minute. Pondering Politics, welcome to the chat. Who's winning? Look, I'm biased here. I can't. Look, I'm a moderator. I'll let you make your own decisions. Right now, we are going to be talking, though, about the breaking story of the day. There has been, confirmed now, a second attempt at President Trump's life, at former President Trump's life. This is what we know so far, okay? So here's kind of like the timeline. It happened at Trump's International Golf Club in South Florida, and it happened today. Secret Service spots a rifle. They were ahead, like they set up like a cordon around President Trump, right? So you have people ahead of him, people behind him. They were ahead, a few holes ahead, and they saw a guy with a rifle. While Trump was moving between holes 5 and 6, there were gunshots. This was not, I'm not clear if the gunshots were from the Secret Service at the shooter, the potential shooter, or if the shooter was taking shots at the Secret Service. I don't know. And then there was a chase, a small chase. The guy ran away, and he was taken into custody. His name has been confirmed to be Ryan Wesley Ruth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the facts as we are aware of them. What are some of your thoughts here? Lactoid. What do you think about all of this mess?
Yeah, no, it's pretty horrific. It's not. I think it's not going to be nearly as consequential as the last one, just because it's on a camera and Trump wasn't hit, as far as we know. But the yeah, no, it's bad, and I think Secret Service was much more proactive this time. It appears, and they actually stopped this from turning into something more dangerous, which kudos to them. But I think it just demonstrates like the need to provide security here in this case and prevent something, because we could be looking at it happening perhaps a third time, perhaps a fourth time. Who
What
knows, right?
what does that say about the state of our country, right? Because this is pretty unprecedented as far as I'm aware, right? At least maybe it's just I'm looking at the past with rose tinted glasses, but at least in my lifetime, there's been nothing like this, right? There's been assassination attempts before, obviously,
And
right?
assassinations before too.
Yes, but when it comes to like so many and so quick a succession, like the time interval, and the fact that yes, we very well might see a third or a fourth or even a fifth attempt as we get closer to election. What does it say about the state of our nation?
Well, I think it says what the stats reflect, which is that we're the most polarized now than we've been since the Civil War. Right? You go back to the 90s, the parties had much more in common with each other than they do now. You go back to the 90s, people in each party, in certain types of like ratings, they would rate people of a different party. They rated them significantly higher, right? They were more likely to have friends of a different political party. And that's been changing. And it's especially been changing since the rise of social media. I think that you and other people will like bring on perhaps people that you disagree with, but you're still able to have a friendly conversation, and you're still you're able to platform that and have that conversation. But people, I think, have gotten so used to on social media just sort of axing anybody they disagree with, to just conform their friend space to the only people that they agree with, creating an echo chamber, creating radicalization, creating polarization. And again, we're more polarized now, I think, because of this than we've ever been. And polarization leads to radicalization. And radicalization leads to extremism, which leads to violence. And so I think it's very possible that we could unfortunately, I think, be in an era where political violence continues to go up because we're just not getting along as much in this country anymore as we used to, across political lines.
Just a housekeeping thing, gang. If you're watching the stream on YouTube, hit that like button. It'd be really nice. Really helps us in the algo. There's like 110 of you, and there's like 20 likes. Let's get that up a little bit, right? Let's get the ratio up. Also, if you want to jump in the conversation, I'll keep this semi-open. I won't bring everyone in, right? But especially if you are more left-leaning and you have some opinions on this, or some thoughts. Please don't hesitate. I'll put the link in the chat. You click the link, accept the rules, and then jump backstage and give me your thoughts, and let's talk a little about it just a little bit, right? Because this is a breaking kind of thing. We don't have very many facts. We have a few. We can guess at the motivation, right? But we don't know quite yet. He is alive. He was taken alive. We can just ask him, right? We'll find out. So don't like rush to judgment here is what I'd ask. But yeah, if you have some thoughts, I'll put the links in and we'll Nerdidity. That's silly. Nerdidity says, "Have you been enjoying today's assassination attempt? Comment down below, uwu." That's funny, but I understand. Let's bring in Zetzway.
They may have found his Twitter, by the way. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
What's his Twitter say about the guy? He hasn't retweeted me, has he?
I'm not seeing any retweets from you. Huh.
That's good.
If this is Ryan Ruth, if this happens to be him, which this one random source is saying that it is, I'm not
random source. What random source?
A mod from my Discord. So if this happens to be him, which I'm not putting money behind that horse right now. This Twitter is pretty anti-Trump, like pretty aggressively anti-Trump, actually. So
that tracks. right? Like if you're going to shoot at someone, you don't do it to your friends, right? So, um, no, that makes sense. Zetsway, what are some of your thoughts here?
Well, so if we go with it just right there, like with you, what you just said that like he's anti-Trump, whether or not something like falls in like fighting words or things like that, where we might hold someone responsible, you do that prior. You wouldn't do it like it would be based on what you say without having seen if anyone acted. So that's one of the reasons where even in your conversation there that it like if it turns out that he's been listening to even let's just say let's say he is a Destiny fan and he said like oh yeah I did it because of that. I still wouldn't hold him personally accountable because or in any way accountable because if you did you would have said it before the person took action. If you try and convince someone to like go rob a bank, whether or not they go rob the bank is irrelevant. You're still responsible either way. And so, but even for this, like the last guy, that one that shot at him, he wasn't anti. I think he was just trying to make a name for himself, basically, with my understanding. After a quick gooning session at the end.
What do you think
I
this
don't know
says
what
ab-
his politics are. There's weird things about that shooting. Honestly, the fact that his body was cremated so quickly. I haven't seen too much investigation into this, which is kind of bizarre. I it's from what I'm seeing now. I'm not seeing like hardcore like pro or anti-Trump links, but again, like I'm not seeing a lot on that guy, which is pretty bizarre. I don't know.
That happens. Well, I mean, even like the was it the guy who Las Vegas guy, the guy who like killed
That's
like
also
50
weird.
people. Yeah, that just says that we don't always get. There's not always a ton of information for us to find out, especially when the person dies. The person's dead. The question is how much they leave behind for us to piece anything together. And so
What
well,
do
I mean,
you so like Zetsway, since you're here, what do you think this says about the state of our nation, about the state of our democracy, about the state of our discourse? That this
I
keeps happening. It keeps happening.
yeah, I don't know if this is I don't know yet because part of it is just we have so much more easy access to information, videos. So it's like that. Even the Vegas shooting, we had video like live video feed within minutes, and so it's like how much of it is. I mean, in our history, we've had people try and like shoot each other and had duels in our like between Congress people. Violence isn't completely on like off kilter for our country.
That should be
But-
legal, by the
But at
way.
least in the last 30 years,
Yeah,
it's this is very in modernity, right? This is
Yes.
very, very unique.
I'll
there's
defend
gonna-
duels, by the way, just to be clear. But go ahead, Zetsu.
yeah.
Actually-
I'm already in favor of mutual combat. So I mean, the fact is, I mean,
Boom.
if someone,
Yeah.
as long as you have like informed consent,
Exactly,
I guess. But
informed
like,
consent. That's what I'm saying. So
but-
duels aren't the problem.
No,
Yeah.
look, conformed consent isn't enough for everything, right? Like, but
Well-
we're besides the point here.
Yeah.
We'll debate that another day. We're talking today about like, I don't think Trump consented to this. To be clear.
yeah, no.
So
It's the question is it going to escalate? There will either be a point that forces everyone to chill the hell out, or we fall into the abyss. I mean, my hope would be that eventually there's going to be something that causes people to chill, but there's no guarantee if and when that'll be. And so, like, that would be my hope, but I don't think we're there yet. Because again, if he actually if something actually succeeded, I think things would actually like that. I don't think people are going to continue to go like, haha, I'm so glad he's dead. That I don't think anyone would actually go that far. So it's easy for someone to joke about it when it failed, but I don't think people
someone would
there's a
go
lot
that
of people.
far.
There's
It would be a
lot
race
of
to it.
people.
there would be
Uh,
a race to see who could be the most outrageous with it. But I also think in tandem with that, you would see in just and I said this last time, blood on the streets. You would have inter-party violence.
Yeah.
We would see riots. I don't know if it would be contained or not. It probably would. Like, it would probably be contained, but there would be an outpouring of internecine violence, I think, that we would see.
When Lincoln
Um,
was killed, did we like? I don't know because I think it's so far back. I don't have the information, but was there a ton of
was
violence in the wake
just
of that?
after the Civil War, so I mean, you could I don't know how much of it was connected to the fact that a war had just ended and there was still like
no
a
one
lot of
wants
back
to
and
go.
forth, right?
Yeah,
Well,
There was a degree of
also,
fuel.
well, I mean, also when he was assassinated, it was arguably due to, because the person who assassinated him because of pro-Confederate sympathies, right? Booth was a pro-Confederate, and he specifically, when he shot him, said, "Long live the South." So, I mean, obviously, yeah, that is connected for sure. Now, I don't know how much like actual violence around the whole streets occurred after that, because the North had already won. The North was pretty politically unified at that point and was militarily
There's
occupying
always
the South.
skirmishes after a war like that. There's always little
Sure.
skirmishes.
Yeah, there's always
and
going to
things
be.
like that. Like look at the Japan
Yeah, for
soldiers
sure.
that didn't surrender for years after. Right?
There's going to be like a little bit. There's going to be a little bit over time for sure. But the South didn't really surrender all at once. It was sort of piecemeal over the course of several months. But I think that in this case, I think a lot of people, the Democrats that I know in real life, which by the way, normies are much more unhinged than online personalities on some things, right? I think normies are much more reasonable with like how much they care about other things as opposed to politics than we are, the people here, including myself, 100%. But normies, like when you ask them specific questions about like politics, they'll give you like the most ridiculous answers, right? Most of the Democrat friends that I have in real life simultaneously believe that the shooting was fake, that he hired a Navy SEAL to fake it, and simultaneously wish that it was successful. And they say this openly. I think that if he was assassinated, you would have large parts of the country
You
celebrating.
need better friends.
I'm going to assert this is probably most people at this point on both sides, which is incredibly unfortunate.
Do you really believe that? No, are you being serious here?
Most
You
normies,
think that
yeah.
Most normies, if most Democratic normies, right, wish that the Trump assassination was successful, and vice versa,
Yeah.
most Republican normies wish January 6th would have been successful?
Yeah. I think most people on the top are going to be much less unhinged on this. I think that people who maybe have like more grounded principles, they're probably going to be less like this. But I think a lot of people, to them, politics is a war, and also just a way to try to get whatever they want, and support a side.
Look, I don't have hard data here, but I don't believe you. I think that you were wrong. I think I when I say I don't believe you, I believe that you have friends like that. I don't believe you're lying. I just don't believe your assertion that this is most of normies. I don't believe that. I think most normal people abhor violence. Most normal people abhor the state of our country when it comes to the discourse. $20 from Lawson Harrison. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. $20 from Lawson Harrison. Lactoid. Would you have a teeny weeny bit more respect for the kid if he had used a flintlock and wore a tricorn hat?
For what kid specific? Oh, the first attempt?
I think so. I'm assuming.
Would I have? I would.
He'd throw down a glove and say, "I challenge you to a duel before it."
That would be fine then, right? If he actually challenged, and then Trump would say no, and then whatever. But like, would I have more respect? I wouldn't have. It wouldn't be any more justifiable, and it would still be horrific. I would be maybe a little bit more impressed, but.
Debaser says Wick is delusional. What? If you want to join us, you're welcome, Debaser. You can tell me why.
Was there any like specific claim with it associated with that, or
you gotta be more specific with what I'm delusional about? My assertion here is that political violence is bad. Okay, we don't want that. It's destabilizing. It's a threat to democracy, given the theme of the day. And two, that most normies don't want political violence on either side.
I don't think that they want I think most normies probably don't want instability. They probably would be very unhappy with like the violence that break out following something like that. But I think that like immediately after it happened, if you polled like all Democrats like after like a successful assassination attempt, I think that more than 51% of them would be like, I don't know if they would say it. I don't know if that's a problem. I think more than 51% of them would be happy that it happened. And maybe I'm just like a black pilled on this. I don't want this to be the case, but I do think that is the case. I think people hate that man to an extent that is rabid at this point.
If all we're saying is what you think in your head, it's possible that like either side would say like that, if they thought like, if with enough thought, they would just think to themselves, it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good if Harris died. If Harris was killed, would we all be happy? And the answer is they might say yes, just because she is like because it means you win your political party and go, well, it's not like I'm not going to say it openly, but I'll think it. That's a much lower standard than saying, or if they openly, I don't think anyone would openly celebrate assassination
Do
of
we
the
think
president.
that
I
there's
think,
a difference between being happy and being relieved? I think there is.
yes.
I would think that there'd be more people who would say, I'm relieved, but that's
I
a
think they're the same.
substantive difference than them holding a party or celebrating it in a tweet and things like that. And even then, I think that especially if an assassination attempt is successful, no one's going to be relieved in the immediate aftermath. Everyone's going to be scared shitless. Everyone's going to be waiting for the next shoe to drop. The stability of our country will go down in the immediate aftermath of that.
The fear will
Do you
kick
disagree?
in. I think the fear will kick in at some point, but I do think the initial reaction, like I think relief is kind of is commiserate with what I'm talking about. I think that people would be satisfied, which I don't like, and I think that I
Vigilante,
want
get
to
on
see.
in here.
I want
Get
to
on
see.
in here. Jump backstage. I'll pull you in.
I want to see more. I don't know. I want to see more debates, Wick. I want to see more people coming together and hashing it out. That's what I want to see.
I think it's a little disconnected. We have a couple people. I'll bring them in.
I can step out so that they're not getting crowded.
Sure.
Later.
That's why. Thank you. Appreciate you, buddy. Okay, it's
Sure.
William. What are your thoughts here?
Hey, man. No, I was listening to what Lactor was saying. I'm from Puerto Rico, currently living here in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And I also have some normie friends that have said the same thing. They have come up with all sorts of excuses, and I thought it was in my immediate circle. But listening to Lactoid, I'm starting to think otherwise. They came up with excuses like, "Oh, he had a ketchup packet in his hand." That conspiracy theory about the glass hitting him in the ear wasn't the bullet. Absolutely everything from left to right, just to make sure. And I haven't been able to speak to anybody from work right now, but I'm pretty sure that whenever I get to work, I'm gonna start hearing some other conspiracies about this shooting as well. So yeah, I do think normies are actually more unhinged than people actually are. That people that are a little bit more political involved are. Sadly, but it's true.
Again, I think you guys. I think you're both wrong. To be clear, I think that while yes, there are some people out there. There's always been that. That's always been a thing. I tell my audience this all the time, that the whole accusations of electoral fraud, of the election being stolen, right? Those aren't new. Those are something we've dealt with for as long as I've been alive. There's always been accusations that the other side cheats, like Democrats just hire dead people to vote and things like that, right? There's always been these kinds of accusations. But what's different now is how they become mainstream. I think that while, yes, there are always going to be people who think it's fake, which I think is a different problem than the people who would be relieved / happy about it, right? To be clear. But they're both problems, okay? There's always going to be some people who think it's fake. That's just how things work. But I don't think it's mainstream. I also don't think it's mainstream that people would be happy or that they would be relieved if, in the immediate aftermath of a successful assassination attempt on either Trump or Kamala. Now, Vigilante here disagrees with me, though. So, Vigilante, you said you'd be relieved. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, so I see Trump as a fascist at this point. He uses a lot of fascist rhetoric, dehumanizing immigrants and basically just painting immigrants as the enemy. It's typical fascist strategy. And
So, do you hope
I mean,
that he does get assassinated? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say that I hope he does.
But you wouldn't be sad if he did.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that, Lactoid?
Vigilante's coming in here to prove my point. I love it. Thank you for coming on.
I'm not surprised, to be honest. I know that you think that Lactoid is being hyperbolic with what he's saying or whatever I'm saying as well. In another context, I would probably be agreeing with you, Wick. This time, I don't think it's not an exaggeration anymore. And I think the media and both social media and the traditional media, both of them are playing their parts in rotting everybody's brain. So I think we're all at fault, including ourselves.
Don't
Maybe
get me
not
wrong.
directly because you're obviously trying, to ease the tension and trying to air out a couple things that might be needed to be spoken about, which is good. But if you ignore this situation, even if it's, you're not doing it on purpose, but even if you do it because you disagree that it's happening, you're still helping that rhetoric and that violence to keep on festering. So you just don't believe it's happening.
Don't get me wrong. I am sad that we are at a point where we have a presidential candidate and a former president that people like myself feel this way about. Like, it's the state of our country is kind of pathetic. It's pathetic to the point where I've considered moving. Even though I love this country, I want to see this country get better. But I'm at a point where if Trump wins again, I don't think this country has any chance of getting better.
I also, I just
Go ahead.
the Twitter account that I was referring to before just got suspended. I think that was him.
Probably.
So probably that guy. Hold on. They suspended it.
They just
Yeah.
suspended the account. Ryan
Why?
Ruth.
I don't like that because I wanted to see what he had to say.
He was talking
Also,
shit
I'll
about
be
Trump a
back in like
lot.
2 seconds.
Yeah, but I
Kidding.
think it's within the public interest to
Oh no, I
have
agree. I
that
agree with you. Like when you go down
be
his
an
replies,
open thing that people can look at and see.
yeah, like
The
if you,
fact that it's suspended means it's going to be harder for the public to be able to see what this man was saying. And I think that's the public has an interest, has a vested interest in seeing what someone who tried to take a shot at the president
yeah,
had to say.
there was comment after like he was replying to Kamala Harris, basically saying, "You got to do this. Trump's evil. He'll never do that. You got to visit these sick people. Trump is evil. He'll never do that." There was also replies that he did to Vivek, telling Vivek to partner with Nikki Haley, and they should run against Trump in order to save the republic. So, I mean, definitely, this guy was not a fan of Trump, and the account just got suspended.
I guess that is evidence. I don't know if it's enough, but it is evidence.
At least it airs more suspicion.
Yeah.
Yes. So this has been said by a few people in the chat, and I tend to agree with this sentiment, right? And I think that this would be the more prevailing sentiment among Democrats if Trump actually was assassinated. I think that there will be a feeling of frustration that is more so than relief. And let me explain. Okay? People will be disappointed that they didn't get to beat Trump fair and square. And they will know, right? Because it's obvious that this is something that's going to be a fly in the soup for forever, for a long, long time, right? That will be held against them, held over their heads. So I think there will be frustration and disappointment that they weren't able to have a chance to do it correctly, right? To beat this guy at the ballot box where he needs to be beaten, right? Because we don't execute fascists, we beat them at the ballot box. That's the proper response to this. I think that I do also feel concerned for where this country is headed. If this is a continual thing, again, we only have 2 incidences in this election cycle, but that's weird that we have 2 incidences in this election cycle, right? I worry that it's going to inspire others. I'm worried that someone else is going to embolden others. That's a real concern for me right now. It's a real concern for me that people are going to be like, well, I can do it, right? And it normalizes this, right? It normalizes taking a shot at your political enemies. And I think that's a terrible thing.
Creating
Oh yeah, that's very concerning.
what's the say that you guys have? The water gates are open. Is that how you guys say it?
The floodgates. Yeah.
The
The
floodgates. Thank you. The floodgates are open. I think the first attempt, I didn't thought that the second one was coming, but I was a little bit worried because we're not living in normal times. Like for example, when Reagan got attempted to being assassinated, but at the same time, I didn't think it was impossible for a second attempt. Now, actually living through a second attempt really fucking scares me.
It is different though, right? Like again, the surrounding facts are a little different. Well, not the facts, I should say. The surrounding circumstances are different in that it wasn't at a rally. No one's actually been hurt, and we all. I guess this is the second, and the third is that the man was taken alive, right? So we're going to be able to get a lot more information from this one. It also wasn't televised at the same time, right?
Thank
So
God.
I
Thank
think that
God.
there's going to be less coverage of this. I think the response to it's going to be more subdued across the board. But I don't know if that's the right thing. Like I don't know if it's right to have a subdued response to something like this. Well, last words from you guys, Vigilante, and it's William, and then we have a couple more people waiting. I won't cycle.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
on
no
the
problem.
good
Thanks for
work.
calling in.
Okay.
Last thoughts, Vigilante?
I would say that this is definitely sad that we've gotten to this point. I like I said, I would be relieved if it happened. I'm not happy that we're at this point. It's kind of sad that we're at this point as a country.
Thank you for calling in, buddy.
I would not be relieved, just to be clear. I think it would be horrific. And I would agree with you, Wick, that I think that if it happened, there would be a lot more violence and it would be awful. And it would be an awful situation for our country for a host of reasons. And yeah, it sucks.
Okay, we got some new folks with us. What are your thoughts here? What's on your mind about the second attempt at Trump's life? Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'll go. No, you go ahead, Razzle. Okay. So I've spent the last 9 years, 40,000 hours working on this, trying to figure out what's happening in our conversations. As far as I can tell, like how a democratic country is supposed to be able to make decisions, we're supposed to be able to use the battle of ideas to reach thresholds of agreement. But just looking at even the last year of debates of any of the highest level thought leaders, we're just bad at this. We're all bad at this, and there's just a lot to be able to unpack and understand. There's the FCC Fairness Doctrine removal in the 1987, and that just created high levels of corruption inside of our mainstream media when we are talking about controversial issues. There's our K through 12 education, it's not teaching people a long list of critical thinking methods, including a long list of logical fallacies and biases that constantly are at play when we're arriving at what we think is true. So we're not operating off of using the same standard when we're exchanging these things constantly. That's why I'm watching so much of Destiny's debates and the relitigation of those debates, seeing no one's using the same standard. No, anyone, not even Destiny and Pisco are using the exact same standard. So like I think we have to be able to see that we're not using the same standard, understand what this is, and be able to move in order to move forward. And this will give us goodwill instead of what I believe is happening, that we're manufacturing contempt. That when two people are trying to figure something out together, we can't just agree to disagree. We can't. There's a long list of things that if we just continue to agree to disagree, it will, the problem gets worse. We never reach any amount of ideological conflict resolution, and then both people just end up hating each other.
Razzle Dazzle, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you're saying in principle, and you as well, Wick, about how it would be best to defeat Trump at the ballot box. At the same time, Trump is such a singularly despicable piece of shit that like it's hard to muster up a lot of sympathy or empathy for him. And I know he's a human being and all of that, and I certainly don't advocate for any sort of violence, like political or otherwise. Like I'm not a violent person, I'm not a gun owner or anything like that. But it's hard to feel bad when this man is basically trying to destroy the country for his own benefit. He's basically running to keep himself out of prison.
So,
Um,
yeah, no, I get it. I have two thoughts. I have one for the first speaker here, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. It's because the way OBS
Sure.
works, right? And like
Sure, no problem. Thorson. Yes, hi.
Thorson, thank you, Thorson. Okay,
Yes.
I'll try to remember
Yeah.
that. So Thorson
Sure.
here had a few. You guys are taking different tacks at this, and I think they're both worthy of exploring. So I'll deal with Thorson's first, and I'm curious what Lactoid would say as well, and then we'll get to the empathy thing, which also bears talking about. So when it comes to standards and how people view the world, that's a hard. That's if you view that as a problem, and it might be, that's an almost impossible one to fix in a free country. Because who is to decide what standard we use? And who is to ensure that that is a standard that is the correct standard to use? One of the benefits of free speech and allowing people to use whatever standards they like, right, is that people get to see these standards compete. Now, you're right. There are some very big issues with the ways we communicate. That's true. I just don't see a fix that makes it better without creating a lot more problems that we don't want. And I'm also thinking that regardless of rhetoric, I think rhetoric's a major part of it, no doubt. But the normalization of violence that we see is in part because of what Razzle Dazzle here is alluding to, which is people just don't have empathy for the other side anymore. And I can't ask anyone to have empathy, right? Like that might be an unfair ask, especially if you think that someone's a terrible person, right? But I'm frustrated that a lot of people can't. What are your thoughts, Lactoid? And then I want to hear responses. Go ahead.
I think a big part of empathy is driven by engaging with people, actually. And the more you engage with people, the more empathy you have with them. There's some psychological research, I think, that backs this up that I've seen. One of the things that I think one of the reasons, like I kind of went on a little bit before, that explains polarization is that, if we're talking about like the 80s and the 90s, sure, like there was political disagreement. But generally speaking, right, when you're out in public and you've got, your bowling team or like your group that you go hang out with, you're going to have political disagreements that you're going to argue about, but it's going to be more difficult to just exclude them entirely from your group based solely on their politics. I think it's very easy to do that now, especially in the age of the internet, right? You can just block somebody. Oh, this person posted in favor of Trump 3 times, blocked, right? Oh, this person is in favor of the libs, blocked, right? It's very easy to do that. I think this is what I was kind of getting at when I'm saying I think people should debate more. I think people should debate more. I think people should talk to each other more. I think people should be comfortable with, at the end of the day, going through all the points and saying, look, on some value things, we'll have to agree to disagree, right? Because ultimately, values, I think, are based on axioms that aren't going to necessarily, you don't pick them. You're sort of convinced of them. You don't pick them. But I think the most of debate is really going to be about arguing over factual matters and just trying to, bring forth evidence saying, hey, look, XYZ is happening. You agree this is a problem. Let's have a conversation about it. I think there's specifically because we've been having less of those conversations is why we're getting to a worse and worse place. I think we should have more conversations, and I think we should agree to disagree more on value questions, and we should disagree more on fact questions because I want everybody else in the world to have an accurate view of the world.
Responses, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You go.
So just having a couple more conversations isn't going to do it, because very good faith people are still doing bad form of things they're not taught that literally makes a person avoid the other person's arguments. So if I don't know what a call to authority logical fallacy is, and I'm doing it, I will consistently avoid your argument thinking I'm a good person when you are saying whatever it is. I just know that, well, you have to be wrong because my authority figure is right. And we don't know that this actually causes harm in the conversation, where I'm literally avoiding your argument. I won't take the time to process and logically reason and consider any of the positions you're presenting me. I dismiss it. And there's a long list of these things that we all use to pull the ripcord. Oh, that's a semantic argument. Oh, that's a non sequitur. The list. I have a fucking long documents. I have an incredible amount of diagrams that I've made. The list is long. It's enormously long. There isn't like 5 fucking things we have to care for, and that's it. We're done. We can pack our bags and have a nice day. It's so long. It's so meticulous. Destiny right now is, as far as I can tell, is the best at this epistemic standard. But even he has ranges of really bad things where he's literally doing the same things of dismissing the other person's arguments, not knowing how to engage in them.
Razzle dazzle, please.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I didn't mean to say that I don't have any empathy for anyone on the right or anything like that. I was
Trump specifically.
Yeah,
right?
Trump specifically.
He's kind of like the
correct.
representative, well, if I may, like, because I think this is important. I don't mean to interrupt you, buddy, but
It's okay.
I think it's important, right? But like, we, for whatever reason, right? And I don't think this is good, but it's happened. We view the Kamala, Trump, the politicians, the representatives, as an extension of us, right? And so, especially with Trump, when you attack Trump, when you don't like Trump, a lot of his supporters take that personally, right? And this happens with Democrats too, but with Trump, because so much of his allure is being Trump, right? People take it personally when you don't like Trump. Like, so when you say, I have empathy for the average rightoid, but Trump, I don't have empathy for that guy. They don't make that connection, right? They don't make that connection that they think you're basically lying, is what they think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get that people often see, politicians as extensions of themselves, and I think that's, kind of some parasocial weirdness in a lot of cases, especially going on in the right in the last few years with the whole Trump thing. But, I'm not necessarily advocating for like a one-party system or anything like that. Like, I just want the Republicans to be a functional party again, or something resembling it. I don't want Trump necessarily assassinated, but like, I'd like to see him go full George W. Bush and just like disappear and just go paint watercolors somewhere or whatever, because he's been so toxic. He's been so volatile. I mean, he's now a 34-time convicted felon and adjudicated rapist. And, he's a disgusting person. Lactoid here seems like a nice enough fellow interpersonally, but like, I'm just shocked to hear some of the stuff that I've been hearing tonight. And it's frightening to me that anyone still supports this man after his rhetoric and the things he's done. And it's horrifying to me. It's utterly horrifying.
Which
I don't
is
know
more
how else to put it.
horrifying to you, Lactoid's points in his debate, or the assassination attempt on Trump's life?
Man, that's a good question.
Is it?
Yeah, for me, yeah, because
Do
again,
you believe me, Wick? Do you believe me now?
I don't.
These are not normies that come on my show, but carry on, please.
Yeah, I have a hard time mustering up any empathy for Trump just because of how damaging and how toxic he is. I guess it just breaks my brain more. Both are not great. You're kind of giving me like a Sophie's Choice here, but the logic defending
I
Trump.
thought it was a meme question. I'm going to be real, buddy. I thought it was a meme question, and you'd laugh and say, of course the assassination is more horrific, right? And then we'd have a conversation about how we use like such grandiose terms to describe things that we don't like. But if you're being genuine right now and you think that Lactoid's arguments tonight are on par, or it's a very hard decision to make between Lactoid's arguments and the assassination attempt on Trump, that's a whole nother discussion, right? That's a whole other set of problems.
Well, I
So
wouldn't say.
are
I
you being
wouldn't say it's not.
genuine?
No, no, I'm not saying that like it's on par. I'm just saying that the logic. I can understand hating Trump. I can't understand defending Trump, I guess is how I would put it. And I'm not saying that that Lactoid's arguments are on par with like someone bringing an AK-47 with the intent of murdering someone. Obviously, that's a worse thing, like than a debate.
But when we talk about bothering you, though, you're being genuine when they both bother you about the same level. No, I understand. I understand what you mean. One is obviously more illegal, worse, right? I get it. But we're talking about how you react. Okay, we're talking about how people
because I immediately go to the macro, so I think of like big picture and like the implications of a second Trump term and the damage that would do to millions of people's lives, to who knows what would happen further to women's reproductive rights and God knows what else. It really disturbs me that anyone still supports him. Like the fact that the election is still so close and polling is horrifying. It says a lot about the country and none of it's good.
The best way, by the way, if you want to get rid of Trump, the best way is to vote for him, because if he wins one more time, then he can't run again, and then he's out of the party pretty much, right?
Yeah, but for 4 years it's going to be chaos because he breaks the left's brains.
Yeah, but never
Hold
again.
on. No, Lactoid, that's silly, because it reifies that not just Trump, but his style, what he represents, works.
Is okay and is good, and there's a pattern of like, this is acceptable inside of our society. I actually voted for Trump in 2020. I think that we're constantly, not completely, no. Like, here's the thing, like we're constantly doing this thing of where we're trying to make the other person look worse. So even when we're judging Trump, I think if you were to take the furthest left person, they're not going to judge him fairly. And this is what it all comes down to. When we judge each other, like even inside of our own in-groups, we have all these different standards. Can I trust you to judge me? And can I trust you when you judge yourself? And if you're going to make yourself constantly look better, and you could constantly make me look worse, well, then at some point, no, I can't trust you, and I want you the fuck out of here. You're a liar. You're a gaslighting narcissist, whatever it is. And there's this thing. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere in our society. Challenge me. Go anywhere to any fucking scenario, and it's just in full fucking view of where we're constantly distorting our views, creating higher levels of irrational thought, making the other person look worse than they are. We're downplaying their good behavior and ideas, and we're exaggerating their bad behavior and ideas. And we all should know what this is. We should all know, inside of our common sense, how to never fucking do this. But we're doing it constantly, everywhere. The right constantly does this to Kamala Harris. The left does it to Trump. And then everyone constantly says this is unfair for me. And then they all have their all justified reasons to constantly do mockery, slander, and insults and character assassination over and over and over again. Everyone's just justifying that. I've been in Tim Pool's Discord servers for a long time. I went into Destinies, and I'm trying to tell people, yes, the mockery, the insults, they have value. However, the harm is so fucking high because we're constantly like kicking the other people off the seat, saying you have no right to have a seat at the table. Because if I lobby the pejorative of racist against you, I'm saying you should have no right to ever speak and no one should ever listen to you. And then we'd use a long list of pejoratives to say that.
Well, I think that there's some truth to what you're saying here. I think that both sides, and I talk about this, the word I use for this is, the term I should say, is reciprocal radicalization. I think Razzle Smasher here, I'm going to use you as an example. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure, yes. He justifies, right? He justifies his feelings, what he says, because in his mind, and he believes this, I don't think he's lying, the other side is worse, right? Trump specifically is worse, right? He's worse at this. He does worse things. Therefore, to oppose the thing I think is bad, I need to fight fire with fire. So If he goes low, I go lower, and I'm going to beat him at his own game, right? The right does this too, right? And I see it all the time. I see both sides say we need to start fighting, and the script's only pretty much the same. We need to start fighting like the other side fights. The other side is taking this seriously. We aren't taking this seriously. They're winning, we're losing, so we need to adopt their tactics. And so we just get more extreme actions. We just get worse and worse and worse because each side is using the actions of the other to say, look at what they're doing. We can't let them win. Anything goes at this point. We have to be willing to do what it takes to stop those guys from getting into power. And we see it play out in the super extreme ends with these assassination attempts. I think that's directly connected. I bet you any amount of money you want to suggest here. Well, I won't go that far. I'm not rich, right? But I'll bet you $50 that when they talk to this guy, right? When they interrogate this guy, that he's going to say that I did it because I thought that Trump was an existential threat.
And I mean, I do believe that he is, but I don't think that necessarily justifies what the guy was doing. Again, I don't condone any kind of
absolutely is going to be
violence.
what he used to justify his actions.
Probably. I mean, I combed through his Twitter as you guys were talking right before it got blocked, and it seemed like the guy was a right-leaning Vivek and Haley backer. Like he was looking for any sort of alternative to Trump during the primaries, from what I gathered, looking through his tweets. He was begging Vivek not to drop out. He was begging him to join forces with Haley in his tweets and stuff. So that's just the initial impressions that I got looking at his Twitter. So it's another right-leaning guy taking a shot at Trump. Not that makes that much of a difference at the end of the day. I think it's awful where we've come as a country, that we're even like at this point. I agree with that general sentiment. I'm not saying that, Trump is horrible, therefore anything goes. I'm just saying Trump is horrible, so it's hard for me to muster up a lot of, bad feeling when something bad happens to him. And I'm not advocating that anyone go do that. And I think that the guy who did it should, be prosecuted accordingly and all that kind of stuff.
I think this is what people mean when they're talking about TDS. Okay. Now, as to the comments as to as to the comments as to the shooter being for sure he was anti-Trump. That's obvious, based on his tweets. His replies are full of replies to Kamala, basically saying messages of encouragement, whether that's just because he hated Trump so much, or if he thought that, maybe he actually started liking her at the end. Who knows, right? I think we should wait a little bit.
Maybe he was just a nutcase.
What'd you say? I didn't hear that.
Maybe he was just a nutcase all around. Like, it's possible that he didn't have any kind of violence.
I think you got to be a little bit of a nutcase.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, there was a lot of stuff, talking about Vivek and Haley being a ticket that we can all get behind and that sort of thing. That doesn't necessarily, speak to me as a liberal or leftist or communist or whatever.
I think it would absolutely be like a strategy. I think there's a lot of people, for example, who register as Republicans in Pennsylvania because that state has a partisan primary. And if you want to undermine Trump, it actually would make more sense to register as a Republican. If you hated Trump, it would make more sense to encourage Vivek and Nikki Haley to combat Trump.
Okay, I'll interject.
There's
Who
those
the
things.
fuck cares?
Hold on.
Why are we doing this?
I understand. Right. This is why I started off by saying, I think we should wait a little bit as the information comes in. Obviously, he was anti-Trump, but I think that this guy who did the assassination attempt, I think I'm proposing, based on what I've seen, was infected at the very least with TDS, which is that you have some people who worship Donald Trump. They see him as the God, or as closest to God as can be. I think there was a poll done by Pew that there's a significant number of Republicans who trust Donald Trump more than their own family members. It's a considerable percentage. I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was enough that it would scare you. But then I think on the other end of that spectrum, you also have people who, the same way you have some people who are fanatically in favor of him, regardless of the facts. I think you have some people who are fanatically opposed to him, regardless of the facts. The fact is, as president, he was a relatively moderate Republican. You want to compare him to a president, you could probably compare him to Bill Clinton. in terms of his the actual actions that were done. I don't see, like, when you're saying, oh, like, they kind of go through the whole laundry list. He's a racist, he's evil, et cetera, et cetera. Like, going through his 4 years, like, how I fail to see how anything that, like, any lasting policy that Donald Trump implemented was so outside of the norm. Like, that was so far to the point where it's like, oh God, we're in a different country now.
The overturning of Roe versus Wade is pretty bad.
So, first of all, the Supreme Court did that. Second of all,
yeah, because of his appointee.
That was a good thing. That was a good thing. Roe versus Wade was in the 1970s. It's not even like a super old case. I mean, I guess it's 50 years now, but that's not even like, that doesn't go back to the founding of the country or whatever. And it was a completely bullshit case. It was a bullshit case that Bernie Sanders agreed was bullshit. That
he tried to overthrow the election, bro. Like, this is crazy.
Well,
this is crazy.
Let's go one at a time, right? We're talking about Roe versus Wade, right?
Okay. So, we just had this debate, right? Like,
I know.
We just had this
I
debate.
know. We just had the Roe versus Wade.
What I'm saying, I'm letting you respond, but just keep it concise, and then we got more people we got to cycle, and I want to get back to the subject at hand.
I guess my ultimate point is, like, we can go through each point that you think Trump is the Satan himself, and I'm going to present like an argument as to, well, actually, this is something that isn't as crazy as you think, because the entire Democratic establishment admitted that Roe versus Wade was weak and needed to be legislated, but they never legislated it, even when they had power with Obama. And it's not like this rhetoric began with Donald Trump. You had people like Mitt Romney, who was, I think, probably the most like milquetoast human equivalent of a photo, like, just person that you could possibly run. And even he was like getting incredible amounts of flack. I think Joe Biden said that he was intending to put black people back into chains if he got elected, that he was pro-slavery. Absolutely horrific rhetoric. This predates Trump. I think Trump is now, kind of going to Wick's point here, there is a reaction, action, reaction, action. I think we should break the cycle.
It's always easy to ask the other side to break the cycle, though, isn't it? I think that's what
we both need to break the cycle at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think
we're in a metaphorical Mexican standoff, and one side can't just lower the gun and go, yeah, we're not going to do the insulting rhetoric anymore and allow you to continue to do it.
I'll give an olive branch. George W. Bush was magnitudes worse than Joe Biden. Joe Biden was a pretty moderate president. Trump is wrong when he says that Joe Biden was the worst president of all time. He's absolutely incorrect. George W. Bush is probably, in my opinion, the worst president of all time, and he's a Republican.
Of all time?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow, okay. More than Woodrow Wilson?
I think probably, given the context of the time, worse than Woodrow Wilson, yeah.
Okay.
Worse than Andrew Johnson?
Jackson?
I think
Andrew
so.
Jackson?
Yeah, again, given the context of the time, like, if we want to go back, I mean, I'm going to say that any president that owned slaves, I guess, ultimately is going to be worse because they owned slaves. But given the context of the time, we were a slave-owning country back then. So I'm not necessarily factoring that in.
Sure.
But George Bush, for his time, just simply because of Iraq and Afghanistan, I think.
Okay, Thorsten, Razzle Smasher, thank you for calling in. We're going to cycle you out.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
You.
Thanks.
Where'd you go, Wick?
I moved myself. I did it to myself. I avoided myself, gang. Oh no. Okay, we're back. $5 from the Trib One. Trump's policies haven't been the talking point with Trump. It's stuff like Haitians eat animals or Dems want to kill newborns. And there is some truth to that. Policies aside, that's not really even the main threat that a lot of people see from Trump. It is this destruction of norms that he exacerbates, he accelerates, that he lubricates people being less kind. And that is actually a problem. But let's bring on a couple of people who've been waiting. Hi, you're both live. Night of Day and Non-Fom?
Non-Fon, yeah.
Non-Fon. Okay, sorry. Well, your camera ain't working, but...
why won't this work? There we go.
Go ahead.
Okay. First, I think Lactoid is unfortunately about half right about normies. I figured this out when I was talking to my grandparents, and they said things I cannot repeat on Twitch about North Carolina's Republican candidate for governor. But I think more importantly, I felt this way after the first assassination attempt, and I feel this way now. This entire conversation to me just seems like absolute deadweight loss of conversation. Okay, Wick, I love your content. Okay, I enjoyed the Akana Boy
Save the
debate.
conversation. Do it better. You're here. Give us what it should be. Let's see if the viewers agree. $5 real quick from the Trib One to say Trump's rhetoric and disregard for truth has been the talk. Trumpers absolve him while non-Trumpers despise him. Never want to see assassinations, though. Well, thank you for the $5. And remember, again, all this discussion is happening in the context of we just had another attempt on Trump's life, a second attempt in as many months, I believe. That's a problem. Go ahead, finish your statement, though. I'm sorry.
Well, it is definitely a problem. The issue I have, I just feel like whenever this conversation comes up, I just don't learn anything. I don't learn anything. Okay, I know we're divided. I know people don't like Trump. I just never learned anything from it. When Lactwood was having a bit of a conversation with the last people up there, you know what I learned? I learned that Bernie Sanders apparently didn't think Roe v. Wade was a solid decision. Okay, that is an interesting discussion. It's just all the Trump assassination stuff. It just seems like total waste of time to me.
Sorry it's boring you. But it's kind of the conversation. I get it. Not everything's not all my content's going to be for everyone. I get it. But I do. The reason I'm doing this and the reason I'm having this conversation is because I want to talk about it. Because maybe I won't learn anything, but I want to vent a little bit. I want to talk about it. I thought the interaction between Lactoid and Razzle was a good example of the problem. Why did Night of the Day go away? I wanted to hear from him too. He was muted. You were muted, brother. We weren't interrupting you. Oh well, whatever. He's gone now. He can come back if he wants. But the reason I think that it was a good example of a problem is because both of them, Razzle did this, and then Lactoid did this, started arguing with him, is they went and they tried to argue who was at fault for this or what party he was part of. It wasn't so much what he did or anything. Each side was just trying to paint him as, well, he's not our guy, he's the other guy, right? He's on that team.
Yeah.
He's part of the bad people. He's not part of us, the good people. And that tendency to happen on any major tragedy, right? Whenever there's a shooting, whenever there's a attack, the first thing a lot of people do is check to see, one, what race or gender they are, okay? Is it a white person or a black person, right? Is it an immigrant? Is it a naturalized citizen? And then they check, are they Republican or a Democrat? And even if they aren't one or the other, do they support one or the other more? And I think that makes it impossible to talk about the actual stuff that honestly matters here.
I think it's relevant.
Well, first I want to say, Wick, I was just expressing my frustration with these conversations as a whole. I don't want to attack your content, brother. I understand. It's your show.
I'll attack your content. I was clarifying that we don't know exactly what party he's affiliated with. He's absolutely an anti-Trumper if he is a Republican. If he's a Democrat, he hates Trump. But he suffered from TDS, just like the other caller that I was arguing with, where people become fanatically obsessed with hating him, just like some people become fanatically obsessed with loving him. It's bizarre. It's weird. He's a guy. He was a president. Jesus.
Do we think is at all likely this guy was mentally ill? The last Trump shooter was probably mentally ill, it looks like, in some way. Do we think this is something someone would do if they weren't, in some respect, mentally ill?
Couldn't begin to guess.
They're probably mentally ill.
That's something I'm not going to speculate on, but it could be.
Okay, that's fair, sure.
Night of Day, what are some of your thoughts here? Go ahead.
All right. If you're going to shoot at presidential candidates, the chances of being mentally ill are absolute to a degree less than absolute. There is no, we are not living in somewhere, whoever wins this, you're going to survive the next 4 years. You're going to gain weight in the next 4 years. However horrible you might think Joe Biden was, or if you think he's the greatest thing ever, chances are you got fat during COVID. If you thought that was horrible and whatever, chances are you gained weight and you're lazy. You're just a lazy person
I feel
who
like you're
survived a
attacking me personally here,
pandemic.
but go on.
This is the epitome of a first world problem here. The United States of America will be around. Go back and see what the Spanish flu was like compared to COVID. If you, this was a breeze. We're calling that a pandemic. This is not even. We're driving people crazy with hyperbolic and sensational nonsense in order to, no offense, but do this because we're all bored. This is a hobby. So let's go talk about politics online. And we're playing this game of one-upsmanship. We're worshiping rhetoric. Rhetoric is another word for bullshitting somebody. If someone is confused as to what rhetoric means, and if you're not prepared at this point to say, okay, we've gone too far, and I myself am going to step back, you're part of the problem. You have to do it for yourself. You don't wait until the other side this or this side. Be the example yourself. If you can't be that, you are unprincipled. This doesn't go farther than you. It is a you, me, and everybody problem. You have to be the example. This is not, that's where we are right now. We have people, young men, who have very, very bad ideas, shooting at a presidential candidate that if they hit him, there is no way, God forbid they killed him, there is no way anybody can predict what would happen next, other than it would be horrible for all of us. This will not go well for anyone. If there's anyone out here who can't see that and can't step back, get help. Seriously, go get help. I'm 45 years old. Maybe I'm ancient to be on the internet and doing this, but this is, at least I have a frame of reference, and I really feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of scared young people out there. Your life will get better. Yes, you're young, you don't have any skills, you probably suck. The only way you get to not sucking is by actually living life.
Okay. Um,
There's really not much more to it than that.
so I feel like you were a threat to my audience
This
numbers.
guy's based.
Okay.
Just jumps on and calls all of
Telling
us
people
fat.
not
This
to
is
watch
sick as
me. What's
fuck.
going on?
I'm fat
Okay, why do
too.
both of my callers today, right? At least both the callers that are in the call now think, well, I'm here, but this subject sucks and we shouldn't be talking about it.
No. This is a
No. This
fantastic
guy's fucking.
subject.
This guy is fucking completely Chad, right? He jumps in. He's like, "You're all fat. Like all the kids these days are unskilled. They all suck." I'm with it. This is fucking awesome. Keep going.
No, the kids are scared. We have scared them to death. Over, like, if you became an adult, you're of age during COVID, where they told you this nonsense that you have to wear a mask and run around, unless you have literally rolled snake eyes for every health
If it like
defect
obesity,
you
let's say, if they had
possibly
obesity.
have. Here's a fucking treadmill. Figure it out. If you have obesity, move more, eat less. It really works. These things are not. These are not. It will take sweat. Will take effort. Will take discipline. Yes, and you will benefit from all three of those things. The idea that your life is being hindered by Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris is simply bullshit. You be in charge of your life. You write your own story. These
Actually
people do
true.
not.
Actually, look what, you know what? I'm gonna ignore some of the stuff you said that I didn't agree with, but that statement in and of itself, this is a problem I see too much just in general. We all want to blame someone else for our problems, and sometimes, it's hard not to, right? Because some people are directly responsible, right? Like your wife left you, your kid disowned you, your mom and dad beat you growing up. I don't know, right? Like those are real
Well,
problems.
all of those problems. Remember, you had a hand in all of them too. If
Oh, the child who is getting beaten by his parents, partially their fault,
Wick, you're in your 40s.
I mean, if only they did the
Back in
dishes
our
correctly,
day-
Wick. I mean,
I guess.
For
So
real.
That's just a weird. No,
Wait,
I'm
Wick,
not gonna
if-
follow you. That's not
Tied
that
to a
road.
belt
I'm going to
come
make
out of
this.
jail.
I want to make this about. I'm going to use this opportunity for a quick political dunk. Left wingers blame other people for their problems more often than right wingers do. I got a psychological study on that. Right wingers are much more likely to have an internal locus of control, which means they take responsibility. They take responsibility for their actions, while left wingers are more likely to have an external locus of control, which means they believe in systems and in the environment and everything's systemic, et cetera, et cetera. And they can't control anything, nothing's their fault, et cetera.
No, that's the basis.
We're also
for
taller and have higher
a
T
lot
on
of it.
average. But that's
Look,
beside the
Damn.
point.
I'm a master plumber in New York City. I don't have time for. I see the kids. They can't do fractions. They can't. I can't tell you how many guys I've gotten from real hard knot cases. I'm talking straight out of jail. Training them is the first work they've had, and some of them can be in society and get better, and some of them really need to be institutionalized. And I have to hand that guy sharp objects and something that can make fire
Whoa.
and turn my back on him. And you have to get a feel for these things, and you roll with it. Life is
So,
not fair. Don't expect
I
it to be.
want to push back against Lactoid a bit because while you might have a study that says that,
I do.
at least when it comes to active political rhetoric, right? Trumpers especially, they have a persecution complex, right? They have the world's out to get me complex, right? I'm not talking Trump specifically here because obviously, well, there was a second assassination attempt on his life.
They are out to get him, yeah.
Wick, that's also true for the people who believe in the conspiracy theory of racism.
What?
Systemic
I know. No,
racism
we're not
is
gonna, I'm
about
going to make my
something-
point without going.
We need more plumbers in office. That's what we need. We got to bring on more plumbers. Look, plumbers are
not
good at
gonna go
removing
down
the
that
shit.
route.
Removing the bullshit, they are experts at it, okay?
Certainly make it flow.
They are going to
But
clean the pipes of the American politics, okay? They are going.
Let me finish my thought before we get in.
Sure.
Okay. Let me finish my thought. So a lot of the things that I've seen throughout my life, this isn't just with Trump, right? But this is something I've seen on the right, especially, right? That the world is out to get them. The media biased against them, right? If something goes wrong, it's because those damn Democrats got me fired. Those damn Democrats did this. Those damn thanks Obama. It was a meme for a while, right? This idea of blaming everything on the other side, anything that went wrong in your life. Thanks Obama, right? Thanks Biden. Thanks Kamala, right? So while you may have a study that shows individually that might be true, and I'm not discounting it. Maybe it's true, but when it comes to groups as a whole, Republicans are far more often going to be blaming academia, immigration, all these things, all their issues on these outside forces rather than just taking. Look, it's not that immigrants are taking your jobs, it's that you're lazy and you suck at what you do. That's why you can't get hired.
Both can be true at the same time, right?
That's where I am on this.
An immigrant can do better than you at the job, but also be able to be in the position to take it because Democrats let them in.
State measures don't come in Spanish.
But I feel like Republicans use immigration as a scapegoat for like almost everything, for crime, for housing prices. It seems like all of these things they try to blame immigrants for.
Everybody you've ever met blames somebody else when something.
I'm just going for the science. That's all I'm doing. Okay, I'm a scientist at heart.
In the pre-Trump era, that definitely would not surprise me. The pre-Trump era.
This has been consistently replicated. A consistently replicated fact is that conservatives, they're happier. They have more of an internal locus of control. In fact, and the high testosterone is true. And by the way, it's so true to an almost
Fucking
bizarre
broke my
point.
pen.
But Wick, you're gonna like this. When you give Democrats testosterone, they become more Republican. They become, yes, quite literally. So like there was one survey, I can give it to you, Wick. They gave like a cohort of Democrat men higher like testosterone injections, and like they reported warmer feelings towards the Republican candidate over time. So
The number one way to make people vote
Yeah,
Republican,
but you guys don't have
give them a,
you guys
give
don't have
them a
nearly
bigger,
as many femboys on your side.
wow,
give them
that's
bigger
probably
paychecks.
true. There's probably a correlation
I
there as
don't
well.
know. I will cite the counterexample of Nick Fuentes. Okay, chief femboy of all
Good.
femboys. Okay,
That's good.
he's really putting a challenge to your theory here. Okay?
He's an anti-Trumper at this point. Wick, haven't you
I
seen
was
him on
going to
Twitter?
say he is anti-Trump at this point. Like,
Fair enough.
Specifically
Well,
because of Israel.
He's a, like, do we like? Can we really definitively say? Well, we can't say this about anybody, but for someone like him, like he can say whatever statement he wants. Like, there, I can only ever say that that's 70% true about whatever he feels, because he's got to say and be outrageous and do. He's a show. He's and this is part of the problem why we're our politics are getting so twisted, is because, no offense, Wick, I respect you and I'm not trying to shit on what you do, but when we have this now, we have this way to broadcast ourselves,
He's
and
gonna call you fat, Wick.
like this. Wick, I
you know the
I wouldn't
CuteBot
be here if
people.
I didn't
Like,
trust
I
it.
showed you that clip. Hold on. For those of you who don't know, I went on CuteBot last night. Okay, dominated, decimated the MAGAs. Okay, decimated them. Won every single back to back elimination debate that I had. Just crushed them. But one thing that
Well, there
clip
was
of
one
them
that you didn't
talking about
crush.
me after, right? There's a talking. I crushed you too. I just had to go because it was 2
Oh yeah,
a.m.
that's what happened.
Oh, wow.
Sure. Yeah.
Great
Oh, you just had to
call.
go. You're right. Yeah.
I did. I even said that on the stream.
no,
Anyway, regardless, my point here is I saw a clip of them talking about it afterwards, right? I guess Qbot's mod and one of the guys I beat, right, Coping. They thought I was 400 pounds. Both of them thought I was like 400 pounds. Do I give off that vibe, gang?
Not at all. Not at
I'm
all.
like $180, okay, which is like, to be clear,
You're lighter
20
than I
more
am.
pounds than I'd like to weigh. Okay, I weigh 20 more pounds than I'd like to weigh, but I'm not like even fucking close to 400 pounds. What's going on?
No, this is.
I don't give off fat vibes.
How
I
tall
not
are you,
even
Wick?
close.
Not really.
How tall are you?
I'm 5'8".
5'8". Okay.
We're-
I'm gonna calculate
It's-
BMI real quick and then I'll compare it to mine.
No, he's good.
You-
185.8 is good. That's especially for an American. Remember, BMI, you gotta adjust to American standards. It doesn't go.
I am by no means like super fit, right? Like I got a bit of a
Yeah.
gut. I got a bit of a gut, but
We won
like,
World War II. We get to be fatter.
True.
That's the way it is.
White Dark
Correct.
says Wick is heavy. He is weighted with knowledge.
There you go.
Okay. But any other further thoughts on the Trump assassination from either
Please
of you?
don't let it happen again. Well, let's all just
I will
hope
do my
it
best
doesn't
not to let it
happen
happen again. Okay.
Yeah,
Like,
not.
what am I gonna do?
And wait, nothing that any influencer or whatever online personality says or does makes someone go there. And even if you directly were to say it, you're still not responsible. That's bullshit. When someone goes and arms themselves and goes out there to be an agent of chaos, that's all on them. However, contributing to it is on your own conscience. And that's for you and whatever you understand to deal with. And if you find something where you might be liable, you get a letter from a lawyer, that's not going to be a good day. That's how these things can go down. Because you can always get a letter from a lawyer. They send them
Blackpoint's
out.
never sent me a letter. so
Lawyers
I'm
are
good.
terrible people, and without exception.
What about you, Non-Fom? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's not a good situation we're in. I'd much rather live in a world where it didn't happen, and I could just talk about how Trump wants to have consult the Fed on interest rate decisions, which I think is a horrible thing. But we don't live in that world. So,
Well, you know what world we do live in.
I saw that coming.
The world where I send them to the void. And if you are watching this, right, I don't know how much later I'll go, right, but if you are watching this and you have serious thoughts, if you think that we should be, why aren't you talking about this aspect of what happened today? Why aren't you talking about this aspect of what the Trump assassination attempt, right? Or did you hear this about the Trump assassination attempt? If you want to sound off, jump backstage and I'll pull you in, and we'll talk for a little bit. If I know you or at least know of you, does that make sense? I'm being a little gun shy. We've had a couple incidents of late with people coming in and just breaking my trust. Let's say that. But yeah, what are some of your like what has all this, how are you going to change your behavior, if at all, going forward after today?
I'm not going to change my behavior. I think my behavior is fully in line with my position on this, that political violence is wrong, and I've consistently condemned it. Just so you're aware, Chase Oliver, who is the current candidate for president for the Libertarian Party, he is a gay man. He put out a post 10 minutes ago. I 100% condemn the statement from the LPNH, the Libertarian Party of North Hampshire, regarding Kamala Harris. It is abhorrent and should never have been posted. As libertarians, we condemn the use of force, whether committed by governments, individuals, or other political entities. We are dedicated to the principle of non-aggression and to peaceful solutions to conflict. This is also something we pledge as part of attaining party membership. LPNH's statement should rightfully be condemned by all people. I think this is a good statement by Chase Oliver. The Libertarian Party of North Hampshire responded and called him the F-slur. So
Okay.
that was their response to that.
Do you have any thoughts on? Well, no, I'll save that for tomorrow. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the affidavit that was put out recently, claiming it's alleged that the ABC whistleblower knew that ABC was going to rig it for Kamala. Okay, and they wrote up a whole affidavit, right? And from some anonymous whistleblower, and they've posted it, and it's claiming to be true. It doesn't pass a smell test to me. It seems like bullshit, honestly. But I was curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's bullshit or not. I'm actually sort of leaning towards. I mean, obviously, I would need the fact that it's an anonymous affidavit is not the best evidence, but I'm looking at the evidence in in conjunction with everything else. A, Trump was never fact checked. B, there was an interview with the LA Times that Davis, the woman who was part of the moderator team, said that they got the idea, like specifically the reason why they decided they were going to fact check is because people were concerned that statements were allowed to just hang and not be disputed by the candidate Biden at the time or the moderators. That was her response as to why they decided it. They decided it because of Trump. So they made the decision to fact check because of Trump openly. That's been confirmed. And they never fact checked Kamala Harris. And now we have an affidavit saying that they had planned in advance to only fact check Donald Trump. I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see when the identity becomes revealed, if there's more evidence that comes out.
Do you think
in the affidavit, there's a claimed transcript and audio recording. If the audio recording gets leaked, I would absolutely find that to be significantly better evidence than an anonymous affidavit.
You're correct that there is a recording, right, that gets released, and there's actual evidence that we could take a second look at it. But as it stands, is just it feels like, right, they do this thing sometimes, and both sides will do this to certain extents, where they will put something out into the ether that's unverifiable, because there's no way we can independently verify anything about this affidavit. There's just all the names are blacked out, the dates are black, like everything's blacked out here, right? That would be identifiable information. They say to protect the source, right? Fair enough. But they'll put this out. they'll say, we're going to do something about this. This is really serious, gang, and here's our evidence. And then they will never do anything with it. But it becomes part of the conversation. They give their side something to use as a cudgel or use as a talking point, but they never do anything legally with it, so they can never be held liable for quote unquote like giving a false affidavit, right? Because they never submit it, things like that. That's what this feels like to me. It feels like something where they're just putting it out there in the ether. They're using it as a talking point, but it's nothing of any seriousness. Why wouldn't you lead with your recording?
So I agree with you that there's some things about this that are odd, but the explanation is that there's legal concerns they're taking into consideration with how they're doing it. It is pretty pro MAGA sources right now that are kind of giving this audience. I would agree with that, generally speaking. I think that if we see a major news outlet pick it up, that'll be, I think, much better in terms of the credibility here. But I don't know. We have an example of this happening before, right? Donna Brazile was fired because she was involved, like she was unfairly giving Hillary Clinton debate questions, right? We have examples of this happening, and then it came out.
But
And
that's a different accusation because that was a single individual. The accusation here is that a whole network planned this.
well, the accusation is either that the whole network planned it or specific actors within the network planned it. I mean, it could be that just the moderators collaborated on this, which again, being under ABC is potentially responsible for that because they'd be employees, right?
Like,
Respondeat
some of these
superior.
claims are believable in the affidavit, right? Like some of the claims are like, well, Kamala wanted a specific size of podium and
Yeah,
wanted to
which
make
she
sure there was a
had.
split screen, which sure, but I would bet money that Trump had similar asks, right? Similar asks like, hey, can we make sure I have a podium that doesn't make me look like that I'm looking over like this, or doesn't make me look like a giant, right? There are specific asks that campaigns have, specific requirements that they have when it comes not to questions so much, but to like how their candidates presented. But that's not new. That's not unique, and I don't think that matters. The thing that matters to me, the accusation that would be, if it was proven true, would be a problem for me, is the debate questions in advance to one side and not the other. That would be an issue.
Well, and the agreement to only fact check one side.
Yeah,
that would be a major issue.
I would lump that in as the same issue, right?
I also think the fact that on the affidavit as well, there was.
But there's no real evidence at this point that that's true. Just
again, besides the affidavit, which is anonymous as of right now,
it's
right? The
just
name
not
is not
good evidence. It's not enough.
fair. I don't blame you, and I also have issues with this as being credit. Like I'm not gonna be going out there and saying this at this point because I don't think the evidence is good enough to,
and the
to put my
fact
name
checks
behind
weren't
it.
even with the questions that were asked, right? It's stuff that Trump just threw out.
No, that doesn't change necessarily the nature of the affidavit, right? Because the fact checking, what the affidavit alleges at least, is that the questions were given in advance, or sample questions were given in advance, that were substantially similar to the topics that were going to get brought up. That there was an agreement that Trump would be fact checked, like on the fly, but that she wouldn't, right? And the other allegation is, I actually think this is probably the most believable, but also I think kind of a problem, is that an agreement beforehand, they're not allowed to question her about her time as Attorney General in California. That was in the affidavit, and I think
No,
that
I would have a problem if there was only one side got to say no, don't ask these questions. Like I'd have a problem if both sides had questions that were off the table, right? I think
what possible questions could, like, Trump was asked everything. What he was asked about Kamala's skin color. What possible questions did Trump?
I don't know, but like I'm agreeing with you. It would be a problem.
She
if-
called him a.
if-
Did she
if
call
it
him a
was one
rapist
side.
at one point? Like, I mean, in my mind, I'm looking here. Like
mean-
the attorney. We talked about this right immediately after the debate, Wick. Like her record on the Attorney General thing. That was like we both. I'm pretty sure we both wanted that to be delved into. But the
Yeah.
problem is that was her weakest moment on the last debate during her primary, because Tulsi Gabbard just like obliterated her on that point. And I do wonder, like,
Sure.
it
Again, I
would
just
make
don't
sense.
believe this is what happened.
It's circumstantial evidence. I don't disagree.
Yeah. And it's just so convenient that there's always an excuse. We talk about external locuses of control, right? Like, it's just so convenient that there's always an enemy. So there's always someone else to blame when Trump does poorly. There's always something that happened that made him mess up or caused him to stumble. It's never that he made a poor decision. It's never that he just had a bad debate. It's
He did have a bad
someone
debate.
was working against him. The deep state, it's outside actors that are plotting against him from the shadows to make sure he looks the worst.
To
But
be clear,
you're correct. There are people who are out to get him, as we've seen today.
as today, yeah.
But yeah, it's different between the lone gunman versus a conspiracy. Does that make sense?
Hold on. I agree with that point, and that's why I said immediately after the debate on Twitter, you can find it, right? I immediately said Trump lost. The moderators were biased. I sort of from the beginning, I think that they're biased, but he lost. I think Trump had a lot of bad moments. I think that overall his energy just wasn't the same. I think overall he lost, and I think that even if the moderators at the time, at least, I thought pretty definitively that even if the moderators were not biased, that I think Trump still probably would have lost. However, if let's just assume, because the only question of conspiracy really happened with this affidavit coming up. Let's assume it's true for a second. If it is true that Kamala Harris got sample questions in advance and Trump didn't, and if it's true that they were intentionally planning on fact-checking him but not fact-checking her, and if it's true that certain topics that were weak for her were not going to be brought up, but that he didn't get the same kind of advantage there, I don't know at that point. Like, if the affidavit is true with everything it's saying, I think I can't say definitively that Trump would have won or lost if those advantages hadn't been there, right? I just don't know at that point.
Yeah, but we're into a degree of hypothetical that is just so far removed, I think, from what actually happened. That's it.
You brought up the
Again,
affidavit.
If the recording drops and it's verifiable, I might be eating crow on this. It's very true.
I got a question for you on this one. Let's say it does drop. Let's say it does drop the audio, and it's like, oh shit, there was actually conspiracy. My biggest thing here would actually not be with ABC News. My biggest thing here would be for the Kamala campaign, like criticism of the Kamala campaign.
No, that would be bad for both.
For
both
both.
would have huge issues of trust.
Yes. Would
going
you stop trusting Kamala Harris at that point?
I would trust her a lot less.
A lot less.
How's that?
Okay, fair enough. Would you
It,
still vote for her?
it would be a problem for me. I don't know if it'd be an insurmountable problem, right? But it would be a huge problem. I don't know what I'd do.
I think if that drops, I think that would affect the vote more than the debate, actually, pretty significantly.
Well, yes, but again, here's a problem we're looking at, right? The first assassination attempt, you guys aren't wrong that about a third of Democrats think it was fake. It was staged. It was all made up, right? There's going to be a portion, I don't know how significant a portion, of people who think that this recent assassination attempt was just all made up, right? That it was a deep state, or it was a inside job or whatever, right? Like that Trump hired a guy, that this guy's a patsy, that they's just gonna say it, right? I can hear the conspiracy theories forming as I speak, right? So even if you have ironclad evidence that Kamala and ABC News conspired for this, there's going to be a significant portion of the voting public who just doesn't
believe it. True, yeah.
But that's it's the same in the opposite too.
Yeah.
There could be, it could come out that this dude who's posting this was just lying. We could have recordings, right? Screen caps of his Discord and stuff where they planned to make this up to protect their daddy Trump, right? And you would have people who say, no, that's just fake. That's deep AI fakes from deep state that is destroying America, and they're just trying to hurt MAGA people, right? This is all a lie. I just don't know what to do with that at this point. I don't know where to go with it, because we live in a post-truth society in a lot of ways, and
This-
that's a problem for me.
This is kind of like what I was saying before. Like, I do think that debating facts is a good thing, and I wish people would do it more often, as opposed to what I think a lot of people do, which is just not engaged in any kind of like no. A lot of people just don't want to get into the nitty gritty and the
Yeah.
details and things. They're just like, this sounds right. This sounds about what happened. And it's like, okay, that's fine as a first impression, but like, you should have curiosity, right? You should want to know if it actually is the case. You should look into that. Don't you want to?
So I got
want to.
I got two super chats to go through, right? $5 from Lesson Cell. As of today, Trump has more combat experience than Tim Walz. Thank you for $5. $5 from the Trib One, and this is a question to you.
a great joke,
if
by
the
the way.
conspiracies were all true, I'd be a Trumper. Assume the moderators weren't plotting. What should Kamala have been fact-checked on?
Oh boy, I mean, we can go through a lot of that. Kamala needed to be fact-checked on the very fine people comment about the Charlottesville rally. I've had multiple discussions about that here on this show. And I mean, I think that when your opponent concedes to you, that's a pretty definitive sign of a win, at the very least, right? I'm not sure that one was really up in question. Kamala Harris lied about that. At this point, we're consistently getting the same statement over and over again from Kamala and Joe Biden about Trump's statements on the very fine people in the Charlottesville rally. Yeah, it's disturbing. I really don't like that those statements are consistently being made, and I wish that would have been fact-checked, because Biden made the same statement in the last debate, and he wasn't fact-checked. But to be fair, Trump really wasn't fact-checked in the last debate either, right? There really wasn't the same level of fact-checking that was occurring. We can also talk about the association.
Hold on. He didn't really get, like, when we say he got fact-checked, I can remember 3 instances of him getting fact-checked, and maybe you can add.
There was
to my
5
memory
times,
here.
according to I think there was a news agent 5 times he got fact-checked.
Okay. But one of the fact checks was they're not eating cats and dogs in Ohio, right? What was some of the other fact checks that he got?
I'll find the list off the top of my head. I remember one of the most egregious fact checks was he said, "I'm being the Lex Friedman thing," where he said, like, I was being sarcastic, and the David Muir said it didn't sound sarcastic, which is like an inappropriate thing for a moderator.
It didn't.
It doesn't matter. It's an inappropriate thing for a moderator to say. Like, that's not a fact check.
Well, hold on. I don't know if I agree with you here. So Trump was asked, the reference to what he said on the Lex Friedman podcast came up, right? When he was asked if you conceded the election. I forget the exact question here, but the back and forth was, on like the Lex Friedman show, you said you lost by a whisker. And first he denied it, right? Which, okay, maybe he forgot. Fair enough. He talks a lot. He goes a lot of these shows. Maybe he did forget, right? But then he tried to do this thing where he said, well, no, I was being sarcastic. That strains my credulity that he believes that. So first of all, he was trying to just knock it away by saying he didn't say it. But when saying, then they were pretty sure he did, right? And he did. They were saying he tried to knock it away another way by saying, no, I was just being sarcastic. I watched that interview, at least that portion of it. He wasn't being sarcastic at all.
I understand that you don't believe he was being sarcastic. I probably don't either. But again, that's not for a moderator in that kind of format. That's not for them to say. If somebody says, like, fact checks you, and you say, like, well, I was doing this. This is why I was doing it. Like, the moderators aren't going to. Why would a moderator comment their opinion on a presidential debate? Well, like for example, what if Trump was like, oh, we're going to do tariffs or whatever, and he's like, well, I think tariffs are bad. You agree, right? Yeah, tariffs suck. We all agree that tariffs suck. What do you think, Kamala? It's like, well, what the fuck? No, you don't say that. That's not your role here. Like, you as a moderator, Wick, this is a different space. That was a presidential debate. you don't say that.
Look, I would love to host a presidential debate, but I would make it clear that we're going to do it my style. It's my house, my rules. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if the candidates would agree to that, but I would definitely be more interesting. I agree. The other thing that Trump should have been, or that Kamala should have been fact checked on, was the persistent lie on the Project 2025. She specifically said that Donald Trump.
2025 twice.
Well, there was a specific claim within Project 2025 that was pretty critical. She said that under his Project 2025, he's going to monitor pregnant women around the whole country to make sure they don't get abortions. She accused him of planning to do that. There is no policy he's proposed that would indicate that is anywhere going to be what he wants. And a program to monitor pregnant women around the whole country, that was not fact checked. I can find you I went over that. I went over the transcript. Again, no fact check on that. No fact check on the very fine people comment. Those are the two egregious ones I can think off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more I can find. I think she was wrong when she said there was no soldiers killed in any act of war or something along those lines. I think there was something wrong there. I'll have to find the exact quote before I talk about that one. But I remember there being a problem with the statement she made about soldiers being killed, and that wasn't fact checked either.
Okay. Well, Lactoid, I know it's been a little later than we normally go. Thank you for coming on my show. Gang, I'm just not getting any more information on the assassination attempt. There's no real info to have as of yet. They do have the man alive. We will get more information as we go. But what I would ask my audience, right? All I ask is that you take a beat before you run with things, right? You take a beat before you start blaming it all on sundry on the other side. And can we stop using these events as ways to get dunks? I don't know. Any last thoughts, Lactoid? Go ahead.
Political violence bad. I think Kamala Harris. I think that you had multiple debates on whether or not Trump was a threat to democracy, and when it comes time to talk about the Democrats doing bad things, we have to talk about Trump as well. I'm sure. But even when we do that, I think it's been pretty clear this whole time. Don't shoot people. Yeah, that's mostly what I have. Don't shoot people. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you. Right. Okay. Fair enough. With that, I will see you guys. Look, I might take tomorrow off. Honestly, I've streamed all weekend. I normally don't. I haven't had a break. And I kind of need one. So I might take tomorrow off, but we definitely have some great content coming up next week. We're going to have some people on to talk about the state of the race, who's winning, who's losing, regardless of what we want to happen. We're going to talk about what is happening and why is it happening and what each candidate should do if they want to do better and they want to be more electorally viable. And we'll have a robust discussion on that. Blacktoid might be debating Hutch. I don't know if it's going to be on my channel or not. It's the same topic, so I don't know if you guys want to see that again. But we'll see. Wick was wore out by Cupid. Yeah, look, it was up till 2 a.m. just doing that.
It was
thing.
up late, yeah.
And it wasn't intense, right? I was engaging a lot with people I don't know. And I was in an adversarial kind of on stage trying to not fuck up. Okay. I did have one fuck up during that whole thing though. I think I said the Belfast Accords when I meant the Budapest Accords, right? So oops. But the guy I was facing had no idea what I was talking about either way. He doesn't know the difference between the two, and he probably couldn't find America on a map if you showed it to him.
See, so Dems never get fact
checked. Got away with it. Ha 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 ha. But no, if you guys want to see if you want to see some blood sports, yesterday's VOD's up. You'll have to wade through the first half of it. I go on at the later segments, and I have some debates on Cupot. You can check it out. Lactoid has some debates on his channel. We rated into him last night. But for now, I'm going to peace out, and I'll see you guys later, okay? Bye-bye.
All right. Well, thanks for the conversation, Wick. I'm also going to raid out and go get some dinner because I haven't eaten. Yeah, I don't think I've eaten anything today. So
Let's get some food in us, buddy. But no, it was always fun. It's always a pleasure, and thanks for thinking of me for real. Right when
Oh, of
you
course.
want to have a conversation, I enjoy moderating for you. So,
Yeah, you're a good guy, Wick. Seriously.
peace out, Girl Scout.
Peace out. All right. For those of you who enjoy my content, please consider giving me a follow. Really appreciate that as always. For those of you who gave bits and subs, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the support, guys, and all the just all the good shit. We're on the up and up, especially this past couple weeks. So just in terms of overall engagement, follower count, viewers, all that good stuff. So it's always it feels good to know that things are going in the right direction, and just really appreciate all of you guys for sticking around. So we're gonna go ahead and raid on out. We're gonna raid on out into he's streaming. We're gonna raid on out into a friend, Ranger and Rogue. He's a friend of the channel. He's raided us many times, and I'm happy to return the favor. Hope you guys enjoy it. Gibbs did not pick out my shirt. I actually really like Hawaiian shirts. They are incredible. It's a life hack, really, to keep cool and have a good time.
Useful. How it does